Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 terrifying true cemetery horror stories, we step through the rusted gates of burial grounds where names are carved in stone, flowers wither overnight, and the earth itself remembers what we try to forget. These are chilling accounts of bells that toll without wind, whispers leaking from cracked mausoleums, and footsteps echoing across gravel paths when you know you are utterly alone. This is a new channel, and my goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers watch and leave without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Subscribe now. Before we begin, share in the comments where you're watching from and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there is a cemetery in your town that unsettles you, type its name, because once you step past the gates of these haunted resting grounds, not everything allows you to leave. Kill the lights, silence the world, take a slow breath, and let us begin. I used to walk past the old cemetery in my town every night after closing at the diner. It wasn't dramatic. It was the fastest way home. I'd cut across the church lot, past the iron fence with the cemetery sign hanging crooked on 2 chains, and follow the sidewalk under the pecan trees to the corner where the streetlights started again. On nights when the wind picked up, the chains creaked, and the sign tapped the post in a slow rhythm like a loose shutter. I never liked that sound. But I didn't think much about the dead. The living were trouble enough. I worked the late shift with 2 other people, Hank, the cook who swore every time the grill sputtered, and Maria, who could balance 3 plates on one arm and still refill a coffee with the other. We had our regulars, the 2 old men who argued about high school football, the nurse who came in at 1 a.m. for pancakes, and whichever trucker managed to turn off the highway before the town went dark. It was a cheap place, fluorescent lights humming, a radio that fuzzed in and out between country stations. On busy nights, our manager Cal stayed late, counted the register, and smoked in the alley. The night I first saw him was a Tuesday in March. Windy, colder than it had any right to be. We'd closed at midnight. Hank was already out back, snapping his lighter and cursing at it. I hung up my apron, told Maria goodnight, and pushed through the door into the alley. The air smelled like old grease and the metallic sting of rain that never came. "Want me to walk you?" she said, appearing behind me with her bag. She always asked. She knew I cut past the cemetery. "I'm fine," I said. I always said that, and she always squinted at me like she didn't believe it. "Call me if you see something weird," she said, smiling. "Other than the usual. Like Hank's hair?" "He heard that," she said. Hank flicked us off without looking. I left them and crossed the 2-lane, shoes slapping damp concrete. The church loomed ahead, brick shoulders and a steeple that lost itself in the dark. The cemetery gate stood where it always stood, 2 black posts and a curve of iron bars between them, a lock the size of my fist. I'd never seen anyone inside at night, not even teenagers. Our town wasn't the kind you dared the dead for fun. You just avoided them and pretended that meant respect. He was leaning against the gate when I reached the corner. He was tall and thin, the way suits used to make men look. Boxy shoulders, narrow waist, 2 long sleeves. The suit was outdated. Not in a trendy way. It was the kind of suit your grandfather keeps in the back of his closet with the mothballs. The fabric was dull, almost the color of ash. He kept 1 foot against the bars and 1 planted, posture casual, like he was waiting for someone to pick him up. In his right hand, he held a cigarette that burned but never changed. The ember glowed a constant orange, no drift of ash, no shortening paper. For a second, I thought he was a statue, some weird donation from the church. Then he turned his head and looked at me. I don't have poetry for that moment. He didn't have glowing eyes or a skull face. He had a regular face, pale, maybe 35 or 40. Hair slicked back in the old-fashioned way like a pool of oil. His features were too neat, like cut-out pieces that fit perfectly. But there was nothing to catch on, nothing to make you say, "He looked like this actor," or "He reminded me of my uncle." He looked like a man without a reference point. I did what anyone does when a stranger is too still at night. I kept moving and pretended I hadn't noticed him. My footsteps sounded too loud on the sidewalk. When I passed him, I smelled the smoke, but there was no tobacco in it. It smelled like something dusty, like books burned in a barrel. The hair on my arms lifted. I made it 20 paces, felt my shoulders loosen, and looked back out of instinct, because that's what your neck does when it thinks something is behind you. He wasn't at the gate. He was inside the cemetery, standing by the closest grave, Hands in his pockets, cigarette still burning. He hadn't opened the gate. I didn't hear the lock. He was just there. I stopped. The wind pushed the church sign and it clanged twice. The man didn't move. I stared for maybe 3 seconds, trying to make sense of it. Then I did something that embarrasses me now. I waved. A little flick of my fingers, like I was acknowledging a neighbor. He didn't wave back. He stared at the ground, then up at me, and the cigarette ember brightened slightly, as if the flame had leaned toward air. I left. By the time I reached the corner, my throat had dried out and the tips of my fingers were numb. I didn't run exactly, but I moved the way a person moves when a dog starts trotting after them and they hope it's friendly. At home, I didn't sleep much. My apartment was over a hardware store that had been closed since before I moved in. The heating clanged and rattled. The pipes ticked like someone tapping a ring. At 2:30, 3:30, I woke to the phantom smell of smoke the way you sometimes wake thinking you left the oven on. I checked my kitchen twice, nothing. When I finally slept, I dreamed about the gate lock and the way the metal shone under the moon. The next night, Maria watched me hang my apron and said, "You look like someone yelled your name from a car." "Bad dreams," I said. "You need a ride?" "I'm fine." She nodded but pulled the cross from the pocket of her apron and pushed it into my hand. "Just humor me," she said. "Hold it until you get home. You know I'm not." "I know. It's for me," I didn't argue. I put it in my jacket pocket and left. The gate was empty. The smell of smoke was still there, very faint, like someone had exhaled hours ago and the ghost of it clung to the air. I told myself it was Cal smoking on his break in the alley that drifted over. I told myself the man had been a trick of the light, some regular taking a shortcut, sliding through a loose panel in the fence I'd never noticed. The third night he was there again. Same position, leaning, suited, cigarette lit. He looked up when I reached the church lot as if he'd been waiting. I stopped across from him but didn't get close to the bars. The light from the nearest street lamp barely touched him. He was more shape than person except for the ember. It was a steady living dot. "Hey," I said. It came out uncertain. "You don't plan how to talk to strangers at cemetery gates." He didn't respond. "I work up the street," I said, because I wanted him to know I had people. "I'm headed home." Nothing. No nod, no acknowledgement. The wind pushed sound through the pecan leaves so it felt like whispering. The cigarette ember pulsed once, then again like breath. I took it as a nod and moved on. When I turned, he was inside again, this time 3 graves in, standing under a low tree with dead leaves hanging like brittle coins. I didn't see him move. 1 second he was at the bars. The next he wasn't. I told myself I missed it when I glanced at my shoes. After that, he started showing up every few nights. Not every night. Not like a clock. But often enough that I started checking the corner of my eye as I approached the church. Sometimes he leaned outside the gate. Sometimes he stood inside by a particular row of stones. I started to piece together the area he favored. The names on the markers there, the dates. One afternoon, my day off, I cut through the cemetery in daylight. The lock was open and the gate propped. A groundskeeper with a sun-bleached hat was trimming around the bases of the stones with a weed trimmer. He nodded at me. I nodded back. It felt normal. The stones didn't seem so ominous in the sun. I walked to the section where the man had stood most often. The markers were older, early 20th century. Some names worn down to a suggestion of letters. A few had short epitaphs: beloved mother, gone home. There was a family plot ringed by a low iron fence, rusted to the color of dried blood. Inside it were 5 stones with the same last name, Murphy. Father, mother, 3 children. The dates piled like a short winter. "What you looking for?" the groundskeeper asked, cutting his machine. "Just walking," I said. "That family, something happened to them?" "Influenza," he said. "One of the waves. That iron out front used to be higher. Kids would climb it and rip their pants. Their mothers wanted to kill me." He eyed me like he wanted to ask why I cared. But he didn't. He started his trimmer again and the question got lost in the motor. That night I passed the gate, and there he was, leaning. I almost said good evening because this thing between us had begun to feel like a routine. I took 1 step, 2, then stopped. The air smelled stronger, like smoke that wasn't made of tobacco. It scratched at the back of my throat. He tilted his head, just a hair. Not enough to call a signal, but enough for me to feel it. "Do you need help?" I asked. Because sometimes you make yourself brave by pretending you're useful. He didn't answer. He pushed off the bar with his foot and stood straight. His suit didn't wrinkle. He slid his left hand into his pocket. The cigarette didn't change length. It simply burned. "Okay," I said. "Good night." I stepped away. I glanced back and he was inside again by the Murphy plot. He wasn't looking at the stones. He was looking at me. And for the first time, I saw something like recognition. Not pleasure, not anger. Just the calm expression of someone who has located a thing he expected to find. I didn't sleep. At 2 a.m, I picked up my phone and scrolled through town history pages I had ignored for years. The cemetery had been established in the late 1800s. There had been a fire at the church in 1969 that spared the older graves, but collapsed part of the new wing. I scrolled past black and white photos of ladies in hats at dedication ceremonies, the mayor on a folding chair. I looked for a man in an old suit with slicked hair. Every man in those pictures looked like that. The next night, a Saturday, we got slammed. People drove in off the highway after a game, yelling about a missed field goal. I kept refilling iced teas, counting out change, running the register. By the time we locked the door, my feet did that fizzing ache I'd come to ignore. Cal stayed to count the drawer. Maria and I stepped into the alley together. "Let me give you a ride," she said. "It's out of your way. 2 minutes is not out of my way. You have your kids this weekend." "They're asleep," she said, then looked at me. "What's going on, really?" I don't know why I told her, but I did. I kept it clinical, like an incident report. "I saw a man by the cemetery. He shows up sometimes. He doesn't talk. He's always smoking. Sometimes he's inside the gate without opening it." She listened without making a face. When I finished, she said, "Don't go that way tonight." "I don't want to be scared of a sidewalk," I said, and it sounded stupid as soon as it left my mouth. "Fear is free," she said. "Use some." Hank came out to smoke. I told them both I was fine again. I put the cross back in my pocket without comment. Then, because I'm stubborn, and because avoiding the cemetery felt like letting somebody I didn't know steer my feet, I cut through the lot like always. He wasn't there. Sometimes absence is worse than presence. I stood at the gate expecting him to appear inside the way he had, sudden and impossible. The smell of smoke wasn't there either. The air felt neutral. I could hear a TV in the parsonage, behind the church playing some sitcom audience laughter. It made me feel extra exposed, as if every light in town had turned away from me. At the corner, tires hissed on wet asphalt and a car crawled by. The driver glanced at me, then away, unimpressed. I started walking again. A block later, someone matched my pace, not behind me, but across the street. I saw the shape reflected in a store window. Tall, slim, the posture of a man who knows how to wear a suit. The cigarette ember wasn't a point, but a long, slow smear of orange. He wasn't inhaling, just letting it burn. I turned my head under the pretense of checking for traffic. He didn't turn his, he stared ahead like we were strangers who happened to be walking near each other. I sped up. So did he. I stopped. So did he. The block ended. I had to cross or turn. I crossed. He didn't follow because he was already there. Across from me again, the way an echo appears without being the source. I took out my phone and pretended to call someone. "Hey, I'm on East Maple," I said loudly to the dead screen. "Yeah, just up from the church. Yeah, I see you." I hoped my forced cheer sounded like I had people, noise, a car idling. His head turned an inch. The ember pulsed. I went for honesty. "What do you want?" I said. My voice bounced off the storefront glass and came back thinner. He took his left hand out of his pocket and flicked ash that didn't exist. The ember brightened and then returned to neutral. He moved in a way that read as forward, but his shoes didn't shift. Instead, the space between us shrank like someone had rolled the sidewalk up. He was suddenly nearer, 2 storefronts closer, as if time had skipped. My heart made a small clicking sound inside my chest. I took a step back and hit a mailbox. "Stop," I said, because telling a thing to stop is a human reflex. He stopped. It was as simple as a machine reaching the end of its track. We looked at each other across a narrow street. His eyes weren't special, they were just eyes. He blinked once, then glanced to the left toward the cemetery. He wanted me to follow. I knew it as clearly as if he had spoken. "No," I said. "I don't go in there at night." He raised his chin a fraction, as if acknowledging a boundary. Then he turned and actually walked, down the sidewalk, past the dark windows. He didn't make sound. The cigarette made a small private glow. I went home another way. On Sunday morning, I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and tried to decide whether I was being haunted or harassed or losing it. I couldn't tell anyone in a way that didn't sound like a prank. I Googled Man Cemetery Cigarette, Texas, and got a lot of news about teenagers starting grass fires. I called my older brother, who lives 2 towns over and works construction. He thinks I dramatize small things. I told myself I was just going to see how he was, but when he asked what was up, I told him about the man like I was reading from cue cards. "Probably some creep," he said. "Don't go that way. Carry pepper spray. Better yet, drive." "What if it's not a person?" "Then really don't go that way," he said. And all of a sudden it was funny, and I laughed and he laughed. And for an hour it felt like I'd let go of something I'd been gripping too hard. That night the diner was slow. Around 11, a police cruiser pulled into the lot and idled. Officer Darrell, round-faced, tired eyes, came in for coffee to go. I rang him up and said, "You guys get calls about the cemetery at night?" He made a face that said, "Always. Kids, drunks. Folks think they hear stuff." "You ever see anybody hanging around there in a suit?" "On a Sunday morning," he said. "Not at midnight." "If you do," I said, trying to sound casual, "let me know." He studied my face like he could read the part I was not saying, then nodded. "I do a loop after close," he said. "Keep your head down." At closing, Maria walked me again to the alley and waited a beat longer than usual, but I told her I was taking the long way. I wasn't. I was going to the gate because I was tired of feeling like I had to orbit my own job. The wind had died. The night felt heavy and flat. The sign didn't creak. The air smelled like water left in a metal pan. He was already inside, 20 paces in, by the Murphy plot. He stood with his back to me, which was somehow worse. I put my hand on the top bar of the gate and felt cold that burned. A winter that wasn't in the air. I took my hand away, half expecting a layer of skin to stay behind. It didn't. The lock hung there, big and simple. I said, "What do you want from me?" keeping my voice level. He didn't turn. He dropped the cigarette to the grass. The ember didn't go out. He stepped on it, and it passed through the sole of his shoe like light passing through glass. I don't know what I expected, that he'd write a message on the ground, that I'd hear a name in my head. Nothing happened. He bent at the waist, a formal movement like the beginning of a bow, and for a split second I thought he was grieving. Then he straightened and turned. He didn't motion me in. He didn't wave. He just started walking deeper into the cemetery, and with each step he took, something inside me leaned. I climbed the gate. I didn't think about it. 1 second I was on the sidewalk. The next I had both feet on the lower rung and my palms on the cold curve of iron. I was over and dropping into the grass before my brain finished the sentence, "Don't do this." My shoes sank into damp earth. It smelled like cut weeds and that dry smoke. The night was suddenly quieter, like sound had a fence too. He stopped near the center of the cemetery where the ground dips. The stones huddled a little closer there, the way people do when they're unsure where the line is. He looked down at a headstone that lay flat on the earth. I walked around to read it. The name meant nothing to me. The dates were unremarkable. The epitaph said, "He went home before dawn." I waited for a chill to crawl up my spine. It didn't. I looked at him. He looked at me. The ember brightened, and for the first time the smoke curled toward me. "Do you want me to say a prayer?" I asked, feeling stupid. He blinked once, slow. The ember went dark. My chest tightened as if someone had cinched a belt around it. I opened my mouth to suck in air, half sure the oxygen had left the cemetery. Then the ember lit again with no spark. He exhaled. I breathed. We stood like that for a long time. A car passed on the highway. Somewhere a dog barked at nothing. He didn't move. I didn't either. When I finally stepped back, his head tilted, as if hearing a small noise from far away. I followed his gaze, without thinking, and that's when I noticed what had changed. The gate was closed. I hadn't heard it slam or even swing. The lock hung exactly as it had before, chain coiled, simple, dumb. Panic is a thing that travels up from your feet. I felt it lift into my legs and then my stomach. I took one step toward the gate and realized how far it was when there's no path under your shoes. "I need to go," I said. He nodded. That startled me more than anything. The nod was normal, polite, the kind you give a stranger when you hold a door. Then he was no longer there. He didn't fade. He didn't streak. He vanished between one breath and the next, as if the night had blinked. The ember traced a tiny line in the air where it had been, then snapped to a point and fell, winking out before it touched grass. I walked fast toward the gate, then faster. The graves to my left and right felt higher than they were, like low walls. The pecan tree branches reached down like they'd been thinking about it all along. I kept my eyes on the iron bars because I knew if I looked down I'd step wrong and the ground would give the way it sometimes does in old places. When I reached the gate, the lock was indeed locked. I touched the chain. It was warm, the way metal gets after being handled. I told myself a groundskeeper had come while I was distracted and closed up. I told myself that man had a key, except I was the only person in the cemetery. I climbed again. My hand slipped on something greasy that wasn't grease. It coated my palm like a film, smelled faintly of that dust smoke. I wiped it on my jacket and hauled myself over, scraping my shin hard enough to feel it through the adrenaline. I landed on the sidewalk and stood there with my hands on my knees, laughing a little, the way you laugh when you don't want to cry. Behind me, inside the fence, something clicked twice, like a lighter refusing to catch. Then the smell came again, stronger, and my chest pulled tight because it wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from inside my jacket pocket. I reached in. My fingers found something small and thin. I pulled it out into the weak streetlight. It was a matchbook. Dark gray, almost black, with the name of a funeral home I didn't recognize curled on the front in faded silver. When I opened it, there were no matches, only a thin strip of used heads, all burned, all intact. On the inside flap in tiny print was a slogan: "We stay until the smoke clears." I dropped it like it had stung me. It landed face down on the sidewalk. When I bent to pick it up again, it wasn't there. I didn't take the cemetery route after that. For a week I drove to work in my brother's old truck. The first night I walked again, I went the long way, past the pharmacy and the closed laundromat, then cut over 3 blocks later. The sky was the color of bruised metal. I kept telling myself I was done with it, that there was no reason to go near those gates again. I still smelled smoke sometimes. In my apartment. At the diner. Once in the frozen aisle of the grocery store, between the peas and the ice cream. It never lasted long. A few seconds of that dry, old paper smell, and then it faded. I started to think it was just in my head. A smell you remember so well your brain inserts it into empty space like a placeholder. 2 Mondays later, a man came into the diner right at close. He was in his 30s, neat hair, hands that looked too clean for our town. He slid into a booth under the radio and ordered black coffee. "You're a little late," I said, "because we were 5 minutes from locking." "I won't linger," he said. His voice was polite, neutral, the kind of voice that fits everywhere and nowhere. I brought his coffee. He didn't add cream or sugar. He didn't drink it either. He just wrapped his hands around the cup like a prop. "Do you know the cemetery on Maple?" he asked after a silent minute, like the question had been waiting its turn. "Everyone knows it. Do you walk by there?" "No." The lie came out too fast. He nodded as if the answer had matched what he'd been told. "Good," he said. "Don't." I waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "Do you?" I asked. "I don't walk," he said. And for 1 second I saw it. The way his suit fit a little too perfectly at the shoulders. The way his hair had a slick to it no product makes anymore. The air around him seemed a degree cooler than the rest of the diner. The coffee in his cup didn't steam. I looked at the door without meaning to. It was closed, but my brain supplied the image of it opening without sound. He slid a $10 bill onto the table and stood. The coffee was untouched. "Thank you," he said and walked out. He didn't push the door with his hand. He didn't need to. The door swung open as if from a draft. It didn't close right away. It hovered for a breath, then eased shut like it was being careful not to make noise. Maria stared at me from the counter. "You good?" she asked softly. "Yeah," I said. I picked up the untouched cup and dumped it in the sink. The coffee smell rose warm and normal and almost sweet. It didn't cover the other smell underneath, the one like burned paper. I left by the front that night and waited for Maria in the lot. She gave me a ride without comment. We didn't talk about the man or the matchbook or the gate. We talked about her kids' math homework and Hank's conspiracy theories about meat suppliers. It felt like stepping onto a dock after treading water too long. At home, I found the matchbook on my kitchen counter. I hadn't brought it there. I hadn't even seen it since it vanished off the sidewalk. It lay beside my keys, simple and gray, as if I'd emptied my pockets and set it down without thinking. I stood there a long time. Then I took a glass bowl from the cabinet, dropped the matchbook into it and lit a kitchen match. The flame flared sulfur yellow and settled to a steadier orange. I touched it to the edge of the cardboard. The matchbook didn't catch. I held the flame there until it licked my fingers and I had to pull back. The match burned out. The matchbook was cool. I dropped 3 more matches in a row and it remained stubbornly gray, faintly warm, faintly smelling of smoke. I left it in the bowl and went to bed. I woke at 2:30 to the sound of my front door latch easing. That soft metal click you only notice when you're listening hard. I sat up. The apartment was dark. Streetlight from outside made a rectangle on the floor. In the kitchen, the bowl on the counter gleamed faintly. The matchbook was gone. The next morning, the groundskeeper from the cemetery was at the diner when I came in early for coffee. His hat sat on the table like a pet. He nodded to me. I brought him a refill he hadn't asked for. "You ever notice a man over there?" I asked, trying to sound like I was making small talk. "Tall, old suit, smokes." He looked at me long enough that I wondered if he was hard of hearing. Then he said, "You don't want me to answer that?" "I do," I said. He considered his cup, then me. "My granddaddy took care of that place before me. He said there was one he saw now and then, always by the gate, always with a cigarette that didn't end. What did he do?" "Went about his work," he said. "My granddaddy wasn't special. He didn't think the dead wanted talking to. He thought they wanted things to be the way they were. Grass cut, stone straight, gate locked." "Who was he?" I asked. "The man. Don't know," he said. "Granddaddy said he wasn't the only one who saw him, just the only one who didn't pretend he didn't." I nodded. He finished his coffee and left exact change. When he pushed the door, it stuck for a second as if someone else was on the other side pulling. I still walk the long way. Sometimes I take the truck. There are nights when the smell of burned paper shows up in my apartment, and I open a window in January just to let it out. The matchbook turns up where it shouldn't, on the edge of my sink, on the back of my toilet tank, once on the passenger seat of the truck with the cover flipped open like a mouth. I don't touch it when I find it. I leave it where it wants to be, and sooner or later, it isn't there anymore. Every few weeks, when the night is very still, and the sign isn't creaking and the town seems to be holding its breath, I will allow myself to pass the church and look down the sidewalk at the gate. Most times it's just iron and chain and the darkness of trees beyond. Once in a while there's a shape in an old suit leaning against the bars, with one foot up like a waiting man. If I keep walking and don't look directly at him, I'll see him again out of the corner of my eye, standing inside by the old family plot as if he were never anywhere else. If I do look at him, really look, he won't move. He doesn't need to. The distance changes anyway. People tell you cemeteries are quiet, but that's a lie. They're full of small sounds. Leaves pushing against stone, chain tapping metal, the little grit noise of gravel shifting under your shoe. If you stand there long enough, you hear another sound too, thin and private like a match being struck in someone else's pocket. I don't go in at night anymore. I don't climb the gate. I don't pretend I'm brave enough to see what he wants me to see. I'm not sure he wants anything from me at all. I think maybe he wants me to know he's there, the way a neighbor leaves a porch light on so you'll see it through your blinds and remember you aren't alone. But on the nights when the wind dies and the air flattens and I smell the old smoke in my hallway, I put my keys in the bowl beside the door and listen to make sure the latch catches. I check the kitchen. I look at the empty glass bowl on the counter and wait, just a second, for the small, soft click of a matchbook closing, the one that tells me the night has decided, for now, to stay on the other side of the gate. I grew up in a part of Texas where the woods are thin and stubborn, more scrub than forest, where the oaks lean like old men and the cedars smell like pencil shavings when you snap them. We called it Red Hollow, though the map said Hollow Creek. There was an abandoned graveyard tucked back in those trees, maybe a mile from the highway and a lifetime from town. If you were a teenager there, sooner or later, somebody dared you to camp there for a night. It wasn't even about ghosts. It was about not backing down. I held out longer than most. I told people the graveyard was just a place where families ran out of money and time, and the county forgot them. I told the story of the caretaker who supposedly used a lantern to guide mourners when the road was just wagon ruts. I said we put lanterns on everything back then. Porches, fence posts, the undersides of wagons, because you either carried light or you were lost. People said, "Okay, philosopher," and laughed. But the reputation stuck. Anyone who saw a lantern swaying through those trees at night, moving like a slow pendulum, wasn't supposed to follow it in, because it didn't lead you back out. On a Friday in late September, my best friend Gabe showed up with a pack of cheap beer, and my younger brother Micah, who was 20 and still trying to prove he belonged with us, dropped a tent in the bed of my truck like a dog dropping a stick. Tori came last. In daylight, she talked fast and laughed a lot, and at night she got quiet like she was listening through the air. She wouldn't say yes right away. She asked practical things like how far from the road, and is there a fence, and do we have permission, as if the answers mattered. Then she looked at me over the hood of the truck and said, "If you're going, I'm going." We left just after sunset. The fields had that yellow-blue color that makes the fences look older, the cows more like boulders than animals. The gravel road spat us into a 2-rut track, and from there we parked and walked. The gate was a rusted rectangle with one hinge left. Somebody had tied a loop of yellow nylon rope around it and then gave up. It hung like a failed plan. The graveyard wasn't big, 30 stones maybe. Some had slumped into the dirt, others leaned, and at least half of them were the same family name. Collier, Collier, Collier. The fence was iron, waist-high, cold when I put my hand on it. Beyond the stones, the trees came in close, as if the graveyard had pushed them back once and then lost the strength to hold them off. We set up camp outside the fence under a pecan tree. The nearest light was a blinking red tower far off toward the highway, and the occasional wash of a truck's high beams painting the tops of the oaks white. It was a nice night. Crickets, the thin whir of something that only sings at the edge of hearing, and Tori breaking twigs for an evening fire like she was making kindling for a recipe. Gabe tried a ghost voice and got heckled for it. Micah pretended not to be scared but kept counting the stones again and again, like the number might change if he looked away. We talked about regular things for a while. Jobs, rent, the mess we'd inherited from our parents, how Gabe swore he'd leave this county but somehow never packed. Tori told a story about a deer that stared into her headlights without blinking and then walked backward over the ditch, which none of us believed. I said I was worried about the truck battery when we left the door open too long. That's how normal we wanted it. It was around 1:30 when the air turned oddly cool. Not cold like a front moving through, this was September in Texas after all, but cool like stepping into a cellar. Tori felt it first. She rubbed her arms and said, "Do you feel that?" And Gabe lifted his beer and said, "Ghost AC." And Micah smiled like it was a joke he wasn't sure if he should laugh at. Then the sound of the crickets weakened, like they'd taken a breath and held it. I know how that reads, like I'm writing a scene. But that's how it felt, like someone with deliberate fingers was turning a volume knob down around us. We didn't see the lantern at first. We saw the glow. It was the kind of light that doesn't belong in the middle of nowhere, yellow and moving, a smudge where there shouldn't be one. It came from the left, from the deeper trees past the fence, and then it slid behind a pair of stones and out again, the way a person moves when they think they know where they're going in the dark. Gabe stood up. "All right," he said. "Sit down," Tori said. She wasn't whispering, but it felt like a whisper. If it's kids, let them do their thing. If it isn't kids, then it's a lantern, Micah said. He said it lightly, but his teeth clicked on the last word. We waited. The light drifted 2 rows in, then 3, like it was walking the aisles. I listened for footsteps, for a crunch of dry leaves, for a branch snapping under a careless boot. All I heard was the wires in the pecan tree above us ticking in the light breeze and the small, impatient breaths we were taking. I leaned forward and said, "Hello?" Which sounds corny now, but felt necessary. The light kept moving. If anything, it curved toward us and then away, as if it had heard me and decided to let me see it better. "Maybe someone hung it up," Gabe said. He gripped the top rail of the fence and tested it. The fence rattled in a way that made me think it would hold for a good minute, and then fold all at once. He glanced at me to see if I would say no. I didn't. He climbed. He swung a leg over. The metal squealed and the fence settled half an inch deeper into the dirt. Tori said his name in a careful voice, and Gabe grinned back at her and then dropped inside among the stones. "Might as well do this right," he called, and started across, keeping to the aisles the same way the lantern had. Micah watched him go and then looked at me. I shrugged. We had come to not back down. He climbed next. He's shorter than me and he moves like he owes gravity money. He found the same purchase on the rail Gabe used and swung over, landing with embarrassed noise. We watched the lantern glide through the trees, always at the same height, always the same slow sway. There was a curve of chain above it and the suggestion of a handle, the kind you could hook a finger through, but I couldn't see the top point where it connected to anything. It moved as if hung from a branch that moved with it. Tori's hand brushed mine. She did that when she was nervous, like she wanted to know that the world had edges. "Don't go," she said. "I'm not going to wait out here," I said. "If there's a person," she said, "then we scare them and they leave. If there isn't a person, then it's something that doesn't require a witness. We can be cowards together." I went anyway. It wasn't bravery. It was that feeling you get when you're halfway through something and the only way out is to keep going, because even turning around is a decision. I climbed, the rail biting my thighs, and dropped inside. The temperature changed as soon as my boots hit the grass. It was the difference between water from a hose in summer and water from a well. I breathed and saw nothing in the air, but my chest tightened like I'd stepped into an old church with all its windows closed. I crossed between 2 leaning stones and read the names as I passed. It felt important not to step on anyone. Gabe had stopped about 10 feet from the center of the cemetery. He was tilting his head and squinting the way he does at sports bars with bad televisions. "It's not hanging from anything," he said, not turning. "Ev, tell me what you see so I know I'm not stupid." I came up beside him and said, "I see a lantern." The light swayed between 2 oaks whose lower branches were black against the hazy yellow. It should have been easy to see the hook or rope or hand, but there was only that curve of chain above it that disappeared into the darkness like a sentence unfinished. I wanted to be clever and think it was a drone with a lantern body attached, somebody's bored project. But the light wasn't steady like an LED. It breathed. If you've ever watched a flame behind old glass, you know that pulse. Micah joined us, slipping in on my left. He smelled like the cedar he'd snapped for the fire. He whispered, "Don't talk loud. It hears like a deer." "Like a deer?" Gabe said, too loud. "Shh," Tori said from the fence, not moving closer, her voice a thread that barely reached us. The lantern moved forward and turned right at a row of small stones. It stopped over a length of ground where the grass sank a little, the way it does over graves when the wood underneath collapses in the dirt after too many years. There was no headstone there, just that long, hollow shape where the earth remembered what had been put into it. The light hovered and then made a small, almost absent-minded swing. Gabe took a half step forward. I caught his sleeve. He tried to shake me off and then didn't. The light drifted left now, and we followed without agreeing to. Not close enough to be underneath it, not far enough to say we had any sense. From the fence, Tori said, "Come back." The lantern took us to a spot under a pecan limb about 10 feet up. I could see the branch clearly now, rough bark, a lightning scar like a healed knife cut. Nothing hung from it. The lantern was simply there swaying. I could have jumped and caught nothing. I could have climbed and reached nothing. The chain above the lantern stirred like a snake lifting its head. "Okay," Gabe said, trying on a laugh that didn't fit. "Okay, you got us. Whoever you are, come out and take a bow." Nothing came out. The light drifted forward and we drifted with it. On the second pass, I noticed a jar hanging from a different branch, an old mason jar with rust around the lid, wired up by someone's careful hand. Inside was a small pile of nails and what looked like a lock of hair. I told myself someone had hung it up as a charm or a dare, a thing you do because other people do and you want to feel brave. Tori saw it too. "Don't touch that," she said quickly, and I hadn't moved at all. "Let's take the lantern down," Gabe said. "If it's a trick, then whoever set it up is going to be pissed, and I'll sleep good after that." He turned toward the nearest trunk, a live oak that split into 2 and then 3 limbs. He found a handhold and set his foot into a low notch. The light didn't move, as if waiting. He climbed. "Gabe," Tori said, softer than before. "Don't make it notice you." He didn't answer. His boots scuffed the bark and he grunted with the effort of hauling himself into height. The lantern swayed, the way something does when you move the air around it. He reached a branch about 7 feet up and straddled it, resting. He was close enough now that if the lantern had been attached to the limb above, he could have put a hand on the chain and stopped it. The lantern rose. Not fast. Not dramatic. It simply went up with the same lazy sway, keeping the same distance between itself and Gabe's reaching hand. He jerked back like he'd almost touched a stove. "What the?" he said. And the swear word he'd chosen broke in the middle like a board you think you can snap and then can't. Micah made a small sound that could have been a laugh or a gasp. I couldn't tell which one I was doing until my throat hurt. "Come down," I said. Gabe shifted his weight to climb higher, stubborn to the point of injury, which is a kind of courage in men like him. The lantern drifted higher as he did, preserving that air between them. And something about that felt worse than if it had shot into the sky. It was listening. It was matching him. It had a rule we didn't know yet, and that scared me more than the idea of a person crouched up there playing with a rig. People make mistakes. Rules keep going. Gabe climbed 1 more foot and then his shoe slipped and he scraped his shin raw and said, "All right," and let go. He dropped into a squat, 1 foot twisted under him. Pain took him clean and simple. He gritted against it and then breathed through his teeth, tears in his eyes from the shock. "Not broken," he said, lying to all of us. "Let's go," Tori said. She had moved along the fence now, looking for the easiest way in, as if she might come for him whether she wanted to or not. I hooked my arm under Gabe's and we began to limp back toward the fence. The lantern followed. It didn't chase us. It didn't get closer. It simply kept us company at that same patient distance, as if escorting us out. We got to the fence at the place where Micah and I had come over and stopped. The rail we had crushed was there. The rope someone had tied to the gate was there, same loose knot. But the gate itself, the part that swung, seemed a foot farther to the right than it had been. And when I put my hands on the cold bars and shook, they did not move the way they had before. The metal had a tension in it like a string tuned to a different note. Micah said, "The gate was here," like he needed to hear himself describe it. "Don't be dramatic," I said, and listened to my voice wobble. "We just came in. Climb out." I boosted him and he swung his leg high and then stuttered and came back down. He looked at his jeans like the denim had betrayed him. "It's slippery," he said, but it wasn't. The top of the rail was rough. Tori held on to the fence and said, "What if we go around?" and started to the left. We went with her. The lantern drifted too, not ahead, not behind. The night was very still. There was no highway sound, though the red tower blinked in perfect time, a heartbeat that didn't belong to us. We walked the perimeter. It felt longer than the inside should allow. There was a second gate I didn't remember ever seeing before, a narrow one with a curl of iron at the top where a padlock might have hung once. I pushed it. It swung open a finger width and then stopped like it knew we weren't supposed to use it. "We could jump," Gabe said, and tried. His ankles screamed at him and he hissed a string of words that had no spaces between them. We stood there like we were waiting for a bus, and the lantern swayed a little closer and then a little back, as if tasting how close it could get without breaking its own rule. "Hey," a voice called from the trees way past the fence, left of where the red tower blinked. It wasn't a shout. It was like someone calling across a small creek. We all turned, startled and absurdly grateful. "You kids okay?" A flashlight bobbed and then caught, a real white beam that made our light look like a candle. A man stepped into view in a brown uniform with a badge that flashed when he moved. I could read the last name on his chest in the quick sweep of the beam. Lane. He was the age where everything in your face looks carved for utility. He didn't cross the fence. He stopped a yard from it and set his light so it grazed over the bars and over us. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. His voice was maybe a little amused. Maybe not at all. "Camping," I said, which sounded childish even as I said it. "You're not supposed to be inside," he said. "Cemeteries closed after sundown." I got a call. Neighbor heard voices and said, "Well, they'll see it." I figured I'd come have a look. Tori said, "Can you help us out?" Officer Lane tipped his head as if he were measuring the air with his ear. He looked right at the lantern for a long second, and an expression passed over his face that wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. The way you look at a street you haven't driven in 10 years and realize you know the bump before it comes. "I'm going to ask you to do something that feels dumb," he said. "I want you to walk to the north corner where the big oak is split, the one with the lightning scar, and I want you to keep your hands at your sides and look at the ground, not at the light. When you get there, you'll see the path. Take it straight. Don't look to your left no matter what you think you hear, okay? Why don't you come in and show us?" Gabe asked. He was proud he could still sound cocky through the pain. The officer's face didn't change. "I don't go in there after dark," he said simply. "I've got a wife who expects me to come home like I left." I almost said we'd find our own way because pride is a habit. Then I looked at the lantern and it swayed once and the chain above it made a small sound that was not a chain sound but more like someone tapping 2 coins together. "North corner," I said. I didn't know which way north was, so Tori pointed toward the lightning-scarred oak and we started. The lantern accompanied us at that same slow conversation distance. When we reached the split trunk, the ground dipped and a faint, almost imaginary path revealed itself. A runnel where water might have found a preference long ago and where boots had honored that preference since. "Straight," Officer Lane called. "Don't dawdle. Don't run," we walked. The path led between 2 low stones sunk nearly out of sight. And then the fence was there, open at a place that hadn't looked open from the other side. We stepped through one by one, and Tori, who had refused to enter, walked alongside as if she wanted to show she could if she had to. Officer Lane did not step back to let us out. He stayed where he was, and we went around him, which seemed polite. When we were 3 paces clear, I turned back to thank him. The lantern hung just inside the open gap, swinging slow. Lane put 2 fingers to the brim of his hat as if he were old-fashioned, and then turned his flashlight off. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust, and in those seconds he was gone. Or maybe he had never been as close as I thought. The red tower blinked its indifferent blink. The crickets came back all at once like a joke landing. We stood with our mouths open, breathing like we'd been underwater. We didn't talk much packing up. We loaded in the awkward way you do after something drains the coordination out of you, and then we drove. The truck felt delicate for the first mile, as if something were pushing a broad palm against its back. I kept checking the mirrors, and there were times when passing through gaps in the trees that the reflection caught what looked like a small moving light keeping pace. But it was probably the taillights of a car on the highway half a mile distant. A trick of angles. My brain doesn't like patterns it can't complete. It will make one if it has to. When we hit the main road, the radio came alive without anyone touching it, the volume low. The dial on a station none of us listened to. A preacher talking about lamps for your feet and light for your path. Tori put her finger on the power button and turned it off. And we drove listening to the world like we were newly allowed to. We dropped Gabe off first, because he was closest and his ankle was stiffening and he didn't want the fuss of a hospital. He hopped to his porch and waved and did not look back when we pulled away. We dropped Micah at our mother's trailer, where the porch light was burned out and the front window was a square of bluish TV light. He didn't say he was scared, but he hugged me too long. Tori and I were last because she lives a street over from me, and we both sat in the cab for a second when I parked, looking at the dark shapes of our own trees. "Do you feel like we left something?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, "but I don't know which side of the fence it was on." She leaned over and put her head on my shoulder, which had been happening more lately in small ways I had not named, and then she said, "Don't go back there at night." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. The night after, I woke at 2:13. I know because the clock on my stove blinks when the power line hiccups, and I had fixed it only a few days before. I lay there in the kind of silence that isn't natural, the kind that has to be made. In the trees behind my house, mesquite and a volunteer pecan, I saw a shape of light hanging 10 feet off the ground. It wasn't bright enough to throw shadows on the fence. It was the outline of light, as if something luminous were behind a gauzy curtain that was the world. I blinked and blinked, and it swayed and swayed. It didn't move closer. It didn't move away. I went outside because there are some things you don't allow to get bigger in your mind. I walked barefoot, keeping the porch boards under me as long as I could, then the cool dust. The light drew itself smaller as I got nearer, not dimmer but more self-contained, like it understood showmanship another way. When I reached the base of the pecan, I could see no fixture, no chain, no glass, but I could hear a tiny tapping above me, a tick-tick against nothing, and a smell like hot metal, the way lanterns smell after you blow them out and they're still a little alive. I stepped back. I didn't run. I went inside and latched the door. I stood in the kitchen with my hand on the counter until the knot in my stomach loosened enough for me to remember that I could breathe on purpose. Over the next week, we all developed new habits. Gabe went to urgent care on Monday when his ankle wouldn't let him pretend anymore. He texted a photo of the boot with a joke about how he was going to be faster now with the upgrade. He didn't mention the graveyard. Tori started carrying a pocket knife she'd bought at a feed store with a tiny steer head on it. She said it was dumb and maybe illegal, but it made her feel less like something could just take her. Micah began to sleep with his bedroom door cracked an inch, so he could see the hall light, though he told me he'd only done it because the room got too hot otherwise. 2 Saturdays later, I went to the graveyard in daylight. I told myself it was because I was tired of catching my breath at 2:13 and tired of checking the rearview mirror going past the turnoff. I took water and a small trowel and a rag, the way you do when you're going to be practical about something. The gate looked ordinary. The fence had the same crooked run. Someone had cut the grass recently, unevenly. A volunteer who cared enough to own a mower and not enough to make it look pretty. The lantern wasn't there, of course. There was an oak with a lightning scar that looked less dramatic in the sun. There was the jar with nails and hair, and it looked in daylight like a child's project assembled out of boredom and superstition. I didn't touch it. I walked the rows and read the names. I counted 31 stones and felt relieved to have a number. The hollow in the ground where the lantern had paused was there, a slight collapse where the earth had settled. I knelt and pressed my palm against the grass. It was cool and damp. Through the green blades, I could see a scrap of something like cloth, but when I worried it up with the trowel, it was only a piece of decayed root covered in dirt like an old bandage. I laughed at myself out loud, the way you do when you half think something might hear. When I stood, a woman was by the fence, hands on the top rail, watching me. She was maybe 60s, in a denim shirt and boots and hair pulled back with a rubber band. She had one of those faces that belongs to a dozen women in every county. A composite of grandmothers who can stack wood faster than you. "You went out there the other night," she said, as if she were telling me what I did, not asking. I nodded. "They told me you would," she said. "Boys always do. Girls sometimes don't." "We came out," I said. "We're done." She looked toward the lightning-scarred tree, then back at me. "It's not a thing that can be done with," she said. "It's a road sign. You know how when the river floods they put those gates down? It's like that." "What road?" I asked. It felt like a fake question, a thing you say to keep talking. She thought about it, then shrugged. "The one you take when it's too dark to see where you're going?" "I don't plan on taking that road." "None of us do," she said gently. "You get to choose some of the time, not all." She tapped the top rail of the fence with her knuckles and turned as if to leave, then paused. "My people are in there," she said, nodding toward the stones. "If you're going to come at night, bring bread and leave it on that split oak." "Not for them. For whatever else comes to look." I almost told her we weren't coming at night, but I just nodded because promises are the kind of thing the world overhears. By October, we didn't talk about it anymore. We all had jobs and errands and tires to rotate. The light in the trees behind my house didn't come every night. Some nights it was nothing more than a pale tint to the dark, like memory. On the ones when it was more, when the sway had a clear center, I turned my phone camera on and recorded through the kitchen window. In the morning, the video never showed anything but a grainy rectangle of night and the faint reflection of my own face holding the phone. Sometimes, on walks to the mailbox, I'd find the smallest things on the ground under the pecan. A drop of soot like the ash from a candle that's been lit a long time, a circle pressed in the dust as if a ring had been set there. A dead moth with both wings intact. I swept them into my palm and let them go on the breeze because there wasn't anything else you could do that wouldn't be foolish or worse. A month after, I saw Officer Lane in town. He was buying coffee at the gas station, the kind of coffee that tastes like the inside of a thermos no matter what cup you put it in. I said his name and he looked up with a polite curiosity that did not contain the memory of me. When I told him we'd met at the cemetery, he cleared his throat and said he wasn't out that way that night. Actually, and he shook my hand and said to be safe and then left, the bell on the door jingling like a laugh someone didn't commit to. The clerk behind the counter said, "What cemetery?" Like there was more than one. And then he rubbed his arm like a draft had found him. I'm telling this now because I don't think it's about bravery or even about not backing down. It's about the peculiar way certain places formalize the dark. Most nights, dark is just the absence of light. At the cemetery and then afterward behind my house, it was a person standing quietly in a room waiting for you to notice them. You didn't owe them anything. They didn't know you. But there was a kind of acknowledgement required. You say, "I see you," and then you back away, careful not to bump the furniture. Last week, a storm came in with no rain. The wind ran ahead of it, pushing leaves backwards on the branches so the undersides showed. At 2:13, I woke. I always do now, as if my body doesn't trust clocks to keep the appointment. I went to the window. The trees were shrugging in the gusts, and on the high limb of the pecan, in the space where nothing hangs, something moved back and forth with the wind and then against it, keeping its own time. I pressed my forehead to the glass. I watched it for a long while, until the wind softened and the branches found their own sway again and the movement over that one particular spot did not. I still don't know what it wants, or whether wanting is the right word. I don't know if it's a guide or a guard or just a sign to say, this is the way the night has arranged itself for you, whether you approve the arrangement or not. Sometimes, rarely, I step outside and stand near the fence in the pecan and I say, I'm here. I don't ask for anything. I don't try to be brave. I just tell the dark where I am in case it needs me to draw the map too. And when I go back in, I lock the door, even though I know there is nothing that door was built to keep out. I didn't go back into that graveyard after sundown, like I promised Tori. In the daylight, I sometimes drive past and see the red tower blinking and think of how steady and different things can be. But at night, I keep to the roads I know. I carry a flashlight in the truck and I have matches in the glove box for no real reason. A habit my grandfather gave me that only makes sense now. I tell myself I'm not waiting for anything. If you ever see a lantern moving through trees where there should be none, and it sways like a pendulum 3 breaths long, and you feel the air get careful around you, don't assume it's there to hurt you. Don't assume it isn't. Don't follow it in unless the part of you that listens to rules that have no words understands you already have. If you're lucky, when it's time to leave, it will leave you too. If you're not, you'll step out through an opening. You didn't notice going in and find that the trees by your house have grown a new space 10 feet off the ground, where a lantern could hang if there were such a thing, and that on certain nights, when the world forgets what to do with itself, the space remembers for it. This morning the wind was up again. I stood at the kitchen window with coffee in my hands gone cold and I watched the pecan. In that one spot, invisible and obvious, something swayed. I looked for the chain. I looked for the hook. There was nothing to see and everything to watch. The trees made their usual tree noises. Somewhere far off, a truck shifted gears on the highway. I told myself I had work to do and I would do it. I turned from the window. Behind me, the smallest sound. A gentle tap like glass kissed by metal, as if someone far away had set down a lantern carefully in a place where nobody keeps one anymore. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to see. I knew exactly where it hung. My grandmother, Lillian, was the kind of woman who left bowls of hard candy in every room and knew the full names of her neighbors' cats. She passed in April after a quiet decline, and most weekends since then I'd stop by Cedar Hill Cemetery with flowers and water the little planter box my cousin Abby set up. It was routine enough that I didn't think twice about going on a Tuesday evening after work. Early September, warm air, the kind of sunset that turns granite slabs orange for half an hour and then drops them into slate blue. Cedar Hill is small, one loop road, a handful of maple trees, a tool shed near the back, I parked by the second turn and walked up to the older section. Her plot sits beside my grandfather's, who died when I was 7, and there's a short row of stones that all carry our family name. I could find it with my eyes closed. The flowers were wilted. I was crouched, clipping dead stems when I noticed the space to the right that had always been empty. A new headstone, clean as a porcelain sink, set level with the ground and not yet sun-faded. I glanced at it without thinking. Then I looked again. Then I read it out loud. Stupidly, because my brain refused to process it without hearing the sounds. It was my name, first, middle, last, underneath my birthday. The month, day, and year were correct down to the year, and below that a death date. 1 week from that day. I'm not dramatic. I don't faint or scream. I just went cold, like a wave of numbness poured off the stone and up through my shoes. I looked back at my grandmother's stone like that would explain it, and then at the new one again to make sure the letters weren't doing that thing where you see what you expect. But there it was, carved deep and evenly like someone had triple-checked the work. Same middle initial I almost never use. Same unique spelling of my last name that people usually get. Wrong. I remember a cricket stopped chirping, and for some reason that silence made it worse. The practical part of my brain kicked in and told me there was a mix-up. Some other person with my name. A weird coincidence. The cemetery had done the engraving early by mistake. All explanations were better than the tiny one that was already starting to take up too much space. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, then took another because my hands were shaking and it came out crooked. A car crept by on the loop road and I almost flagged it down like I was a kid who'd fallen off his bike. I didn't. I stood up, put the clippers in my back pocket, and walked to the office building near the entrance because sane people ask questions at desks. The office door was open. Inside, a fan was pushing stale air around. A woman I'd seen before, heavy glasses, polite smile, looked up from a stack of papers. "Can I help you?" she said. "Hi," I said. "I think there's been a mistake with a headstone." "What kind of mistake?" "It has my name on it," I said, and tried to laugh, and it came out tight. "And I'm not," I gestured at myself. "You know," she pushed the papers aside. "Which section?" "Near the second maple. Next to Lillian." I gave her my grandmother's full name. "It's the plot to the right." She typed something into her computer. "That would be section B14, she said. She scrolled. "We had a delivery for B13, B14. Here we are." Pre-need marker installed for. She frowned, leaned closer. "Can I see your ID?" I handed her my license. She looked at it, then back at the screen, then back at me. "This can happen," she said, like she'd practiced the line. "Sometimes families order pre-need stones for peace of mind, and the engraver does both dates. It looks like your family might have purchased." "We didn't order anything for me," I said. The room seemed smaller. "I would know if someone bought me a grave." She pressed her lips together. "It says the order came through Madison Memorials. You can call them." "Do you know a Henry Corbett?" She spelled the last name. "That's my father," I said. "Henry is listed as the purchaser. Engraving approved by H. Corbett." She rotated the screen a little in my direction like that would help me calm down. It might not be as upsetting as it seems. Sometimes people get the full engraving done to make it easier later. "My dad would never do that," I said. "And if he did, he wouldn't give me a death date for next week." She had the decency to look disturbed. "Of course. That must be an error in the order. We can cover it until it's corrected. I'll call Madison first thing in the morning." I called my dad from the parking lot. It rang and went to voicemail. He lives an hour away, and he's the sort who answers on the second ring even when he's in the middle of mowing. I didn't leave a message. I called Abby. She picked up. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay? Did you or Dad order me a gravestone?" There was a beat of silence, then a laugh that turned into a question. "What?" "At Cedar Hill, next to Grandma. There's a headstone with my name and my birthday. And a death date. For next week," she swore softly. "Is this a joke?" "I'm looking at a picture of it." "Text it." I sent the photo. 3 dots. A long pause. That's your name and your birthday." "Where are you?" "Stay there. I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I'm coming," she said and hung up. Waiting is when your brain fills in every empty space with worst-case scenarios. I paced the gravel. I went back to the stone and stared at it until the shadows stretched and made the letters look deeper. I read the date again and again. I tried to imagine the conversation where my father goes to a monument company and calmly orders this, and I couldn't. My father drove me to Little League practice and once cried when the dog died. He bought himself a lawn tractor out of grief. He is not a man who orders his son's grave. Abby pulled up 20 minutes later and skidded to a stop like a TV show. She took one look at my face, then went straight to the stone. "No," she said, like she could veto it. No, we stood there like idiots. She touched the carved letters with the tips of her fingers. "It's real," she said, and then immediately apologized to the air because what else do you say? We went back to the office. The woman with the glasses had already left, but the caretaker, a man with a sunburned neck and a Red Sox cap, was locking the tool shed. We waved him down. I showed him the picture. He shifted on his feet. "I don't know what to tell you," he said. "The order comes in, the stone shows up, we set it. I just moved the equipment." "Can you check the paperwork?" Abby asked. "Office is closed," he said. "I can get you the number." "They open at 8. Abby started to say something sharp, then swallowed it. "Okay," we drove to my dad's house. He wasn't home. His truck was gone. The kitchen light was off. I called again and it went to voicemail. I texted, "Call me. Emergency." We sat at his kitchen table and made the kind of jokes you make so you don't cry, and then we ran out of those and sat in the quiet. She said, "You're fine," like a spell. I nodded. Neither of us said what the date was, or that it was only 7 days away. Dad called at midnight. "What's going on?" he said, breathless. I told him. He was silent. Then he said, "I didn't order anything like that." "Why would I?" He broke off. "Send me the picture." I sent it. He called back in less than a minute. "I'm coming over." He arrived still in his work clothes, smelling like sawdust and that wax they use on new cabinets. He looked at the picture on my phone and swore in a way I'd only heard once before. At the hospital when Mom's prognosis turned south. "It has to be a mistake," he said. "They mix up names." "It's my birthday," I said. He locked eyes with me and did that thing where he looks for a fix. "We'll go there in the morning," he said. "All 3 of us. We'll make them take it up." I slept on Abby's couch, if you can call it sleep. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed about granite dust in my mouth. At 8 sharp, we were at the cemetery office. The woman with the glasses had a manager with her, a man in a shirt with the cemetery's logo stitched over the pocket. He had a folder ready, like he'd been dealing with it since he arrived. "Mr. Corbett," he said, looking at my father, "we're very sorry about the distress. We have the order from Madison Memorials. It lists you as the purchaser, with a phone number ending in 4319. Is that your number?" Dad pulled out his phone, looked at his number as if it might have changed overnight. "It is, but I didn't place this order." The manager turned pages. "The order was placed in person on August 27th. There's a photocopy of your driver's license attached. And a signature." He showed my father a sheet. My father stared at it, then went pale. It was his license. The address was correct. The signature looked like his signature, the same half-legible H. "My wallet wasn't stolen," he said. "I would have noticed." The manager licked his lips. "Madison handles the engraving. We just approve placement. Your approval came through last Thursday via email. From your address," he read it out loud. It was the right address. Dad shook his head. "I didn't send anything. Could his email have been hacked?" Abby said, "Maybe," I said. "But why would someone do this?" "What's the point?" The manager put his palms flat on the desk like he was steadying himself. "We can remove the marker today and keep it in storage while Madison investigates. We won't charge you for the removal. The death date. That's the part that's understandably upsetting. We'll cover the stone immediately." I stood there like a child while they discussed logistics that felt like they were happening in a different universe. The caretaker came and laid a green tarp over the stone. It made the rectangle look like a fresh wound. We watched him stake the tarp down like he was tying down a body bag. For the rest of that day, life went on in its stupid normal way. I went to work. It was impossible to focus. Every email felt like it could be the last email. Every time a siren passed outside the building, my shoulders tightened so hard they ached. People asked me if I was okay, and I said I didn't sleep well. That night I lay awake and listened to the refrigerator cycle on and off and tried to figure out how you're supposed to act when a piece of stone says you have 6 days left. The next morning, an email from Madison Memorials arrived. It was short, too formal. They had reviewed the order. Everything matched the documentation. If we believed fraud had occurred, we could file a police report. They attached a scanned order form. I opened it. It was my father's handwriting. The blocky way he writes his numbers. The notes in the margin, beside Lillian, matching font. There was a line at the bottom I hadn't expected. Special instructions. Death date to be set as provided. Family request discretion. I forwarded it to Abby and my father with nothing in the body because there was nothing to say. We filed a police report. The officer who took it was sympathetic but practical. Identity theft gets weird, he said. But this is a new one. He made copies, gave us a card, said they'd be in touch. On the drive home, my father apologized to me for things he had not done. The third day, someone called my phone from my number. I didn't notice it first because I was in a meeting. When I checked my missed calls, there it was. My own number. I hit redial out of habit and my phone rang in my hand. A minute later, a voicemail came in. I stared at the little icon and didn't play it for a full hour. When I finally did, the message was static and a breath, and then very faintly me. Not a perfect recording. Not like hearing my own voice on a video, but like something trying to be my voice. "Don't go," it whispered. Not yet. I put my phone face down on my desk. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I could think of a dozen explanations. Spoofing, some glitch, a prank. But all of them ended at the same place. Someone set a date in stone, and now my own voice was calling me and telling me not to go. That night I went to my father's. I didn't want to be in my apartment. He made spaghetti like he used to when Mom worked late shifts. We ate it at the kitchen table. The dog, a new rescue he'd named Bear because originality isn't his strong suit, nudged my leg until I dropped him a noodle. "You're not going to die next week," my father said, and sounded like a person trying to make the sun promise to come up. "I know," I said, "because that's what you say." "It's a mistake," he nodded too many times. After dinner, we sat in the living room and watched a dumb show. Every now and then he'd look at me and start to say something, then shut his mouth like it offended him. On the fourth day, the tarp at the cemetery came loose. Abby texted me a photo from her lunch break. The green flap had blown back, and the bottom half of the stone was visible like a shirt riding up to show a scar. "Want me to go fix it?" she wrote. I said I'd meet her there. We got there at the same time. The caretaker was nowhere in sight. The stone stared at us like a dare. Abby took a breath and stepped forward to pull the tarp down. When she did, she frowned. "What the—" She bent closer. The death date had changed. It wasn't exactly different. It had moved forward one day. Still a week from the day I'd first seen it. Still a week away from that first Tuesday. But now today's date wasn't 6 days out. It was 5. The stone was keeping track. Abby looked at me like she wanted me to say, "I altered it last night and forgot." Because even that dumb sentence would be better than the nothing we had. I shook my head. She pulled the tarp back over the stone so hard the stake bent. We went to the office. The woman with the glasses had the same polite smile, but it was twitchy at the edges. The manager looked tired. "We told them the date had changed. That's not possible," he said, and his eyes were saying, "Please be lying." "Come look," Abby said. We all walked out there like we were going to arrest a rock. The manager took off the tarp and leaned in. His face went through 3 distinct expressions. "That's not," he said, and then weirdly, "Who did this?" "You tell us," Abby said. He bent down and ran his finger inside one of the numbers. "It's not marker. It's carved. I said it 2 days ago. I was here when they installed it." It said the first date. He looked at me like I might be a magician with a bad sense of humor. "We don't do same-day engraving. Can you swap it out?" I asked. "Take it away?" "We can," he said slowly. "But that's a lot of equipment. We'd have to get the lift back here. It's not like moving a coffee table." "Do it," Abby said. He nodded. "I'll make the call." That night I slept at my father's again. He insisted. Bear snored like a person. Around 2 a.m., I got up and went to the bathroom, and when I came back I passed my father's bedroom door. It was open just enough for me to see him sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, the way I'd seen him sit when Mom was sick. I almost went in. I didn't. I stood in the hall and listened to the quiet sound a grown man makes when he doesn't want anyone to know he's crying. On the 5th day, the police called. The officer said they'd checked the security footage at Madison Memorials for the day the order was placed. "The quality isn't great," he said, "but it looks like your father." Same hat he's wearing in his license photo even. My dad doesn't own that hat anymore, I said. He threw it away because it smelled like the lake. Then maybe it's an old video, the officer said. Or he bought another hat. I'm not saying we believe. Look, we're not accusing anyone. We're just telling you what we have. I wanted to crack a joke about men and hats. I didn't. Instead, I said, so someone who looks like my father bought his own son a gravestone and picked a death date like they were choosing a wedding venue. Cool. The officer sighed. We'll keep digging. I should have gone to work to distract myself. Instead, I drove to Cedar Hill, which is maybe the opposite of a healthy choice. The equipment was there. A small crane, a couple of guys in work gloves. They'd lifted the stone halfway out when I arrived, and it hung from straps swinging slightly above the grass. Seeing it in the air made my stomach flip. The way the letters looked when you weren't looking down at them. Too crisp, too confident. The date was wrong in a new way. It had moved again. Always a week away. One of the workers saw me staring. We're taking it to the back, he said with the politeness people use when something bad is happening. We'll keep it in the shed until the family decides what to do. They lowered it onto a dolly and wheeled it toward the shed near the loop's far end. I watched until it disappeared. Something in me let out a breath I didn't know it had been holding since Tuesday. That night I dreamed I was in the shed and the stone was lying on the floor and there was dirt where the date should be, like it had turned to soil, and something beneath it was pushing up from underneath. On the 6th day, my phone rang with my own number again. This time I answered. Static, then that almost voice. Stay home, it said. Please, who is this? I whispered, even though I knew the answer I didn't want. The line clicked. The call timer continued anyway, counting silent seconds until it hit 30 and dropped. I told myself I wouldn't go to the cemetery on the 7th day. It was childish and defiant and also probably wise. I told Abby the same. She agreed in principle and then texted me at noon. I'm outside your building. Let's get lunch, keep you busy. We got sandwiches and ate them in my apartment with the TV on, something stupid and bright. Every so often I'd glance at the clock like there was an appointment I needed to miss. When the sun started to lower, the room went that dim yellow that makes you turn on lamps. Abby carried our plates to the sink. You okay? I'm fine, I said. I'm not going. Good, she said. She washed the plates in silence, then dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at me like she was making a decision. I'll be right back, she said gently. I left my phone in the car. Okay, she took the elevator. I turned up the TV. A commercial for life insurance came on. I laughed out loud because of course it did. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Abby. Soon, I stared at the word. Then at another, promise. I typed, what are you doing? No response. I called her. It rang once, then went to voicemail. A different message came in, not a text, a photo, a picture of the cemetery road through a windshield. The maples, the shed in the distance. I grabbed my keys and went downstairs and drove like a jerk. At a red light, I called her again. Voicemail. I yelled at empty air. The light turned green. The entrance to Cedar Hill was open. The loop road was empty. The late sun was low enough to catch the tops of the stones and leave their bases in shadow, like they were rising from a dark pool. I drove slowly, scanning, heart hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. Abby's car was parked near the shed. I pulled in behind her and got out. The air smelled like hot grass. Abby? I shouted, which made every crow in the place have an opinion. I jogged toward the shed. The door was open. The interior was dim, cooler than outside, full of the smell of damp and oil. There were shovels, a coil of hose, a stack of plastic vases, and the stone. My stone, lying flat face up like a body on a slab, and Abby standing a yard away, her hands clenched, her face white, staring at it. What are you doing? I said. It came out harsher than I meant. She didn't look up. I thought if it was here and not in the ground, the date would stop, she said. I don't know what I thought. I stepped beside her. The death date was, of course, today's date now. It had been a week, and somehow it had stayed a week away until the day arrived, and now it had nowhere else to go. The numbers looked almost wet, like they'd just been carved. Abby reached out like she was going to drag her nails across them. I caught her wrist without thinking. Don't, she turned on me. What do we do then? Do we just wait? Bear barked outside. The sound made both of us jump. I hadn't heard my father's truck, but there he was in the doorway, Bear on a leash, my father's face gray. You didn't answer, he he said to Abby. "So I came here." He looked at the stone and swallowed. "We're leaving," he said. "Both of you. Now." He took a step into the shed and Bear planted himself, suddenly stubborn, like he'd hit an invisible fence. "Dad," I started. "Now," he said with a force that made me 16 again. He backed out, tugging Bear. We followed. Outside, the cemetery looked weirdly normal, like we'd stepped out of a dream and the mundane world had politely continued. My father pointed at Abby. "Take my truck. Go to my house. Stay with the dog." He looked at me. "You're with me." "Where?" "We're going to the police station," he said. "You're going to sit in a fluorescent box with a guy drinking bad coffee until midnight, and then we're going to go home, and tomorrow I'm going to call a lawyer and ask how you sue a rock." It was absurd. It felt like salvation. Abby hesitated like she wanted to argue and then nodded and went to the truck. Bear jumped in behind her. My father and I stood there for a second alone in the cooling air, and I realized somewhere in the last week I had started measuring time differently, not in hours, but in what could still happen. We turned to go. That was when the shed door creaked. Not closed, open. There was nothing to creak against. It was the sound itself, as if the air had hinges. My father froze. The hair on my arms lifted. We both turned. The stone was no longer on the floor. It stood in the doorway, just inside, upright, as if a crew had just set it there. I don't mean it was standing without support like a cartoon. It was leaning, wedged into the doorframe like it had been moved and rested and would be moved again. But there hadn't been time. There hadn't been anyone. I knew that, like I know when my name is called in a crowded room. I couldn't breathe. My father said, "Get in the car," and his voice broke on the last word. We walked backward like idiots, not turning our backs on a slab of granite. At the truck, a gust of wind came from nowhere and rattled the tarp stakes by my grandmother's plot. Down the hill, leaves turned over to show their pale undersides. We climbed in. My father turned the key. The engine coughed and then caught. He put it in drive and we rolled forward. We made it 30 yards before a funeral procession appeared at the far end of the loop like a line of ants. Black cars, a hearse, headlights on. No one had been there a moment before. Now there were a dozen cars. My father slowed. "We'll wait," he said. The hearse rolled past at that slow, respectful pace that makes you think about your posture. I glanced into the back as it went by because we all do this and saw a simple casket. Not wood, not metal. Something in between, covered in a dark cloth. The window was tinted, but the angle of the sun let me see a tag dangling from the handle. It had my name on it. I stared. My father saw it too. His jaw clenched. A man in the first car after the hearse lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in that small-town acknowledgement way. He looked like the manager from the office, but older. Or like what the manager will look like when he's buried. I don't know why that's the thought I had. The procession kept going. It turned down the row my grandmother is on. My father turned the truck around in a 3-point turn that squealed the tires. We went the other way and drove out the gate too fast. In the rear view, the maples looked like they were leaning in. At the police station, everything was fluorescent and calm. A kid with acne took our information. A tired sergeant looked at the photo of the stone I had on my phone and said, "That's something." We sat for an hour. 2. My father bought 2 coffees from a machine. We played a game where you guess what crime brought each person in. "Public urination," he whispered, and I laughed too loudly. Abby texted to say she was okay. Bear was asleep. She sent a photo of him on his back, paws in the air, oblivious to stone or fate. At 11:52 p.m., the fire alarm went off. Not because of fire. The sergeant swore and said they'd been having issues with the system all month. The alarm drowned out every thought. We went into the parking lot while some guy in a polo fiddled with a key in a panel. At 11:57 p.m., my phone rang. My number again, I answered, even though I couldn't hear for the ringing in my ears. "Don't go," the almost voice said. "Don't go where you think." "Where?" I shouted. "Where?" "Home," it said, and the line went dead. My father put a hand on my shoulder. The alarm cut off mid-wail and left us all blinking in the sudden quiet. A breeze shifted. Somewhere, a siren. It was 11:59 when my phone buzzed with a text. A number I didn't recognize. One picture, no words. The photograph was of my grandmother's row. The tarp was off the stone. The place where the stone had been was empty now. and the grass was flattened in a shape the size of the marker. In the background of the photo, between two stones, a figure stood, half in shadow, half lit by the moon. Not a ghost. A person in a suit that didn't quite fit. The face was turned away. The hair on the back of my neck prickled because that was my suit. The one I wore to Mom's funeral. The one my father had borrowed once for a wedding because he didn't want to buy a new one. I started to type, "Who is this?" when headlights swept across the lot too fast, too bright. Tires squealed. Someone yelled. A delivery truck blew the stop sign, fish-tailed, then corrected. For a second, I saw the driver's face lit white and shocked. He missed us by 10 feet and kept going. The sergeant shouted something after him that might have been hey or might have been a prayer. My father laughed once, short and shaky. Then he looked at me like he was counting my breaths. "Midnight," he said, and his eyes flicked to the clock on the station wall through the glass. 12 clicked over with the weird little jump those wall clocks make. Nothing happened. No bolt of lightning. No hidden trapdoor in the universe yawning beneath me. No collapse or catastrophic medical event. I stood there. I was still me. My phone didn't ring. No voice whispered in my ear. In the quiet that followed the alarm and the near miss, I could hear the distant hum of the highway. We went home. Abby slept on the couch. I slept in my father's guest room, the one that still had my high school track trophy on a shelf because he forgets to redecorate. In the morning, the sun came up like it always does, smug and golden, and I made coffee and thought, I get to be irritated by the coffee maker again. We didn't talk about the cemetery for the whole morning. We pretended nothing strange had happened. Around noon, my father said we should go see. I didn't want to, but the part of me that touches a sore tooth wanted to. We drove in silence. Bear came with us because he refused to be left. The cemetery looked exactly like it always looks. A man on a riding mower was doing methodical rows. A woman in a pink sweatshirt was replacing flowers at a family plot. Normal. 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 We walked to my grandmother's row. The tarp was gone. The stone wasn't there. For a few seconds, I thought they'd taken it away. Then my stomach went cold. There, in the place where my grandmother's stone ends and the grass begins, was a rectangle of slightly brighter, slightly disturbed earth, like something had been set there and then removed, or placed there, or buried. I crouched to touch the ground. It was warm from the sun. There were impressions where the straps had pressed. There was also something else, a shallow scrape in the dirt near the edge, like a fingernail had dragged there, or like someone had tried to pull something out and given up. Abby made a sound behind me, tiny and pained. I stood. Across the row, the woman in the pink sweatshirt bent to pick up a wind-blown bouquet. Bear whined. My father took a breath and held it and then let it go with control like he was blowing out candles. "We're done," he said. "We are done coming here. We'll deal with paperwork and police and lawyers, but we are done being tourists of this." We left. I didn't look back. In the truck, my father put his hand on my knee and squeezed the way he used to when he thought I was nervous before a game. His hand was warm and real. Bear put his head in my lap and drooled on my jeans. The sky was a perfect, stupid blue. Nothing happened that day. Or the next. Or the next. I went back to work. People asked about my week and I said long. Abby texted me memes. My father sent me a picture of Bear wearing sunglasses. It should have returned to normal. Only it didn't, not entirely. A week later, I was in line at the post office when a man behind me said my name. I turned. He was my height, my build, haircut like mine, smile like mine. The one my mother always said made me look like I was about to confess to something harmless. He held my gaze too long, like mirrors sometimes do when you check them at night. "Sorry," he said. "I thought you were someone else." He left before it was his turn. 2 days after that, a bill arrived from Madison Memorials addressed to my father for a placement service. The date listed was the day after we saw the empty grass. The note at the bottom read, "Completed as scheduled. Thank you for your trust," I called. The woman who answered said their records showed the stone had been placed permanently in Section C. "That's not ours," I said. "Ours was in B," she clicked. "Oh," she said. "Yes, it was moved. Per your father's request." I hung up. I didn't tell my father. I told myself I didn't tell him because it would upset him. But the truth is I didn't tell him because I didn't want to hear him say, "I didn't." Sometimes now when I'm driving at night, I'll glance at the rear view and for a second I'll see headlights behind me that are exactly the distance they were the last time I looked. Not closer, not farther, like they're hovering a careful week away. I'll blink and they'll be normal again. Sometimes I wake at 12 hours exactly for no reason and lie there listening for the breath that isn't mine. Sometimes my phone buzzes with a voicemail notification and there's nothing there. No message. Just an icon that goes away when I look at it. Small things. Barely anything. Exactly the size of unease. I haven't been back to Cedar Hill, that's the truth. I tell myself it's because I'm busy. Because my grandmother doesn't need me to stand beside carved stone to remember her. Because it's healthier this way. But last week I was unloading groceries when a slip of paper fell out of the bag. The receipt had stuck to something wet and had torn and glued itself to the carton. I peeled it off and there was a number written in my handwriting at the bottom. A number I didn't remember writing. Section C7. I haven't called the cemetery to ask if that's a real plot. I haven't looked at a map. I threw the receipt away. Then I dug it out 5 minutes later and smoothed it and put it in a drawer. I'm fine. I go to work. I see Abby. I walk bare when my father works late. The sun rises stubborn as ever. I don't tell this story to be dramatic. I tell it because I want it recorded somewhere outside of me, so that when something happens that doesn't have a word, there's a line you can point to and say, "He said this." It's written down. If you go to Cedar Hill and you walk to Section C and there's a new stone set there, and the name on it is mine, my first, my middle, my last, and you look at the date below and it isn't last week or next week, it's a week from when you read it. I want you to do one thing. Don't tell me. Don't text me a picture. Don't call me from my own number. Just walk away. Let me have the days I think I have. Let me pretend granite is only rock and dates are only ink. Let me pass a mirror without waiting for it to blink. Because sometimes I think the only reason I'm still here is that I haven't gone to see the stone that's waiting where I can't see it. And sometimes, when the apartment is quiet and the clock on the microwave clicks to a new hour, I wonder if someone else is telling this story in a voice that sounds almost like mine. And at the end, he leans toward the microphone and says, "Don't go." Not yet, and for once I listen. I'm not proud of how that night started. It was a dare, and I was 23 and dumb enough to think nothing truly bad ever happens if you've got 3 friends and a flashlight. St. Mary's Cemetery was a small place outside our town, the kind you drive past without noticing. A square of land tucked behind a shuttered hardware store and a rusting chain-link fence with a "No Trespassing" sign that had been sun-bleached into a suggestion. Everyone knew the stories. Kids say names into the dark, names come back wrong, things like that. But most people never went after midnight. We did. It was me, my roommate Marco, his cousin Lena, and our friend Troy. We were the kind of small circle you get after high school when the ones who say they'll keep in touch don't. We spent too many Saturday nights together, watching horror videos and picking apart how fake they were. Marco had this thing about proving he wasn't scared. Troy drank to show the same thing. Lena didn't brag. She just moved with her shoulders squared like she was walking into bad weather. I was the one with a car and nothing planned the next morning. That's how it always goes. We hopped the fence around 12:20 a.m. The air had that late summer damp to it, the kind that sticks to your shirt and makes your hair feel heavy. I remember the smell of cut grass and something faint and old underneath like wet stone. The moon was mostly hidden behind thin clouds. We brought a big flashlight from Marco's garage and 2 phone lights that kept dying, because no one charges anything before a dare. I waited for the thrill you get when you do something you're not supposed to. The little jump in your chest. It never came. We didn't talk about it then, but all of us felt it. That sense of being watched by something that didn't care we were there. Not hostile, not friendly, just indifferent. Like we'd stepped into a room where a meeting was already happening. The headstones were crowded close, older ones tilting at odd angles like teeth in a bad mouth. The names were fading into moss. Plastic flowers lay on their sides, the wind teasing their ribbons. A row of stone lambs marked a section of children's graves. Someone had left a small metal whistle on one of the lambs. I only noticed it later when I went back over the night 100 times and tried to see the moment everything went wrong. "Pick a game," Marco said. "EVP, hide and seek? Bloody Mary, but for Catholics?" Lena rolled her eyes. "Let's just walk. Get the feel. Like investigators." "Investigators don't bring a 12-pack, I said. nudging Troy, who had a beer tucked in his jacket pocket and this sheepish grin that came out when he knew he'd get roasted. We moved down the narrow path like we were following a guide we couldn't see. The flashlight made a white cone in the dark that swallowed and then spit out whatever it wanted us to see. Names, dates, a cracked vase, a bench with peeling paint. We weren't quiet, but we weren't loud either. We laughed at ourselves to keep the nerves from turning into something else. About 10 minutes in, we heard it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even out of place if you think about it. A whistle. Just 2 notes, low and slow. The kind of sound a dad makes to call his kid from down the block. It came from behind us from the path we'd just walked. We turned as one. The flashlight jittered across grass and stones. No one was there. Wind in the trees. A car passed on the distant road, its headlights briefly painting the chain-link fence in white stripes. "You heard that," Troy said, like he needed us to confirm we were all sharing the same reality. "Probably a night jogger," Marco said. "Even though no one jogs in a cemetery." The whistle came again, closer this time, those same 2 notes. It wasn't a tune, not really, just a shape of sound. I can hum it now without meaning to. Sometimes I catch myself doing it while I'm cooking or brushing my teeth and I stop like I've touched a hot stove. "Okay," Lena said. "Let's not be idiots. If it's a person, we don't want to bother them. If it's not a person, we really don't want to bother them." "Back to the fence?" I asked. "Back to the fence," she said. We walked without running because running would have felt like telling the night it was allowed to chase us. The whistle followed, never getting loud, never getting frantic, just those 2 notes as regular as breathing. It always came from behind us, even when the path curved. It didn't echo. It didn't fade. It was just there, like a shadow that had decided to have a sound. At the gate, we didn't bother being cool anymore. We climbed the fence fast, the metal biting our palms. My jeans caught on the top and I had this horrible second where I thought I'd hang there and feel a hand close around my ankle. But I dropped to the sidewalk hard, my knees stinging, and we ran to the car. My sedan looked too small at the curb like an animal crouching. "Drive," Marco said, voice flat. He didn't swear. He didn't joke. I drove. No one spoke until we were 2 blocks away and the cemetery was a rectangle of gloom in the rearview mirror. Troy started to laugh and then stopped. "So that was dumb," he said. "Never again," Lena said. "Promise me." "I don't care if people call me a coward." "We don't go back." "We're not going back," I said. "We didn't go back." But it came with us. The next morning, Marco sent the group chat a picture. The hood of his car with 3 footprints pressed into dried mud. They were small and neat and looked like someone had stepped carefully from the middle of the hood to the windshield, and then back down again. They weren't infant small, more like the size of a kid in grade school. You could count the toes. They were so clear I reached out to touch my screen like I could feel the grit. "Is this a joke?" Lena texted. "Marco, I wish," he wrote. "I'm washing it off before my aunt sees. She'll make me drive to church." Troy sent a string of laughing emojis that didn't look right. I told myself it was just a bored teenager's prank from the neighborhood. We had parked on the street near his place. Kids climb on cars. Kids leave messes. Simple. That afternoon, I went out to my car to grab my sunglasses. There was a little smear of muddy residue on the driver's door like fingers had dragged lightly across. I wiped it with my sleeve and it came away brown, gritty, real. When I shut the door, I heard the whistle, 2 low notes from somewhere down the block. My stomach went cold the way it does when you step off a curb you didn't see. I told myself I was imagining it. People whistle. Birds mimic things. It was nothing. I went back inside and turned up the TV. There's a way a house feels when you've decided to ignore something in it. Every noise becomes the noise. Every sudden quiet becomes a new kind of loud. That night I dreamed I was standing in St. Mary's again, facing a field of graves that looked like rows of people waiting in the dark. The whistle came from behind me and a small hand slipped into mine. The skin was cold, not icy, just cool, like a hand from the fridge. I woke up with my fingers curled around nothing and the taste of damp stone in my mouth. My phone said 3:07 a.m. The next day at work, Lena called me from her car during lunch. "Do me a favor," she said, voice tight. "Say you see me. Just lie if you have to." "I see you," I said. She exhaled so hard the mic clipped. I parked in the lot behind the gym. When I came back from grabbing a smoothie, there were muddy prints on my windshield. Not many, just 3. Like someone walked up and looked in. "Call security. They'll say it's a kid. They'll say it's nothing. I just wanted to not be alone in it. You're not, I said. And I meant it, but I also wished I'd never answered the dare. Never hopped a fence, never called anything out in the dark. We tried to act normal. We agreed not to tell anyone else. People judge your fear by how silly the cause sounds, not by how it feels in your bones. But the whistle made that impossible. It started to show up at the edges of our days. Once while I was brushing my teeth, music playing on my phone, I heard it woven through the song like a thread. Twice in the supermarket, somewhere between canned tomatoes and paper towels. 3 times when I was walking from my car to my apartment and the parking lot lights buzzed and flickered. On the 4th day after St. Mary's, the whistle came while I was on the phone with my mom. She stopped mid-sentence. "Honey, who's that with you?" "No one," I said, and I swear I felt it in my ear. As if someone were leaning over my shoulder. Polite, patient, waiting for me to notice. That night we met at Lena's apartment because she lived on the 2nd floor, and it felt safer somehow. We sat at her kitchen table like a jury, so, she said. We went somewhere we shouldn't have gone. We heard something we shouldn't have heard. Now we're each hearing it and seeing prints. What does this suggest? That it followed us, Troy said. He hadn't shaved in a few days. There were smudges under his eyes like he hadn't slept. Or we brought it, Marco said, quieter than usual, like when you pick up burrs on your jeans and carry them home. I had a thought I didn't want to share. There was a whistle, I said. A real one. On one of the children's stones. I remember thinking that later. Maybe someone left it. Maybe, you think we took it? Lena asked. I didn't, I said. Me neither, Marco said. I didn't, Troy added, but he looked away. Troy, Lena said. He rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't take a whistle. I did pick up a penny from the base of a statue, though. It was like, bright. You know how some pennies just pop? I thought, lucky, but it felt weird in my pocket. In the car, I put it in the ashtray. Yesterday it wasn't there. So maybe it's about respect, I said. We went where we shouldn't. We took what wasn't ours. We're being reminded. Reminded by who? Marco asked. By what? Lena got up and pulled a shoebox from a cabinet. Inside was a thick candle, white with a faint scent of vanilla, and a little plastic bottle of holy water from her aunt's last pilgrimage. She set them on the table with a steadiness that made me feel steadier too. We can return what was taken, she said. We can say we're sorry. We can put the penny back where Troy took it. And if we don't have the whistle, if none of us took it, we put something back anyway. We leave something better than we took, tonight? I asked, though the thought of going back made my mouth go dry. Tonight, Lena said, before it fixes itself to us so hard we don't remember what quiet sounds like. We drove together in my car because mine felt least marked. The sky had that washed-out look that means no stars. St. Mary's was as dark as it had been before, the fence still leaning into the sidewalk like it wanted to lie down and wrap itself in the weeds. We climbed over. The grass sighed under our shoes. The cemetery was different now that we were the ones intruding with a purpose instead of bravado. I could feel every breath I took, feel it become a cloud in my chest. I heard the whistle as soon as my feet touched the ground. 2 notes behind us. I didn't turn. Don't look, Lena said softly. Don't feed it. Just walk. We went straight to the row with the small stone lambs. I recognized the one with the chip on its ear. The base was clean, swept of leaves. I could see the rectangle of bare earth where something small had once rested near the name. We stood there trying to breathe normally. Say you're sorry, Lena told Troy. He swallowed. I'm sorry for taking what wasn't mine. I'm sorry for being rude. I meant no harm. Put something down, she said. He took off his necklace, a simple silver chain with a tiny cross he'd worn since 8th grade. He hesitated and then set it on the stone ledge. I can get another, he said, but his voice shook. I had nothing good in my pockets. I put down the folded 20 I kept behind my phone case for emergencies. It felt stupid, money in a graveyard, but it was the best I had that meant anything right then. The idea of getting home. Marco laid down his house keys for a moment and touched them to the stone like he was letting them rest in the presence of something older than doors. Then he pocketed them again. Lena uncapped the holy water and shook a few drops on the grass. We asked to be left alone, she said, not loud, not formal, just like asking a neighbor to turn down their music at 3 in the morning. We asked to go in peace. We won't come back to bother you. The whistle came again, closer, and I felt it against the back of my neck like a draft. The small hairs on my arms lifted. "Now we go," Lena said. "No running." We walked back the way we came. We didn't speak. The whistle followed, those 2 notes as patient as footsteps. At the fence I climbed without snagging, heart in my mouth. The second my shoes hit the sidewalk, the whistle stopped. Not faded, stopped. The silence after it felt so complete my ears rang. We got in the car. No one slammed a door. No one breathed hard. It felt like waking up slowly. "Did that do it?" Troy asked. His voice had that hopeful wobble I recognized from childhood when you confess and wait for a parent's verdict. "I don't know," Lena said. "We did what we could. For 2 days, nothing happened. No whistles in grocery aisles. No prints on hoods. No dreams of cold hands. I slept like someone had closed a window I didn't realize was open. I started to believe we'd made it right and the world had creaked back into place. It's amazing how fast your brain builds a bridge over a sinkhole and pretends there was never a drop. On the 3rd night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to a soft tap at my apartment door. Not a knock. A tap like a polite finger asking for just 1 second of your time. I lay there staring at the ceiling, telling myself it was a building noise, a pipe, a trick. The tap came again, and again. I got up, not turning on the lights. I don't know why that felt important, but it did. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing but the dim hall. The carpet pattern. The red exit sign glow. I waited. The tap came from lower than the lock, lower than the handle. Down near the bottom of the door, 2 notes drifted up from the crack. The whistle, soft as a breath, patient as the dark. I swallowed and stepped back. I could feel it through the wood, the way you can feel someone standing too close to you in line without seeing them. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry, we already said we're sorry, please go." But something in me knew not to speak. It felt like stepping on a loose stone at the edge of a cliff, say one wrong thing and the ground goes. I went to my kitchen and grabbed a bag of salt because my grandma always said salt keeps things from crossing thresholds that shouldn't. I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in crystals or moon water or any of that. But I poured a thin line along the inside of the door anyway, my hands shaking just enough to make it crooked. The whistle paused. I felt a small pressure against the door, like a hand testing it, then nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun bled into the blinds, I opened the door. No one was in the hall. There were 3 small, muddy prints on the outside doormat, spaced like someone had stood there and shifted their weight. The line of salt was undisturbed on my side. I texted the group. It came to my door. No one responded for a while. Then Lena, "Me too last night." I didn't want to be the one to say it. Then Marco. Same. I heard it under my window. Then Troy. Nothing. The 3 of us waited for a ping that didn't come. I called him. Straight to voicemail. By noon I was knocking on his apartment door. He lived 20 minutes away. The building manager knew us because we'd helped Troy move his couch up the stairs. He opened the door for me with a worried look because I must have sounded wrong on the phone. Troy's place was half dark, blinds down. The TV was on a paused screen. His keys were on the counter, his shoes by the mat. No Troy. I found him in the bedroom, sitting on the floor with his back against the bed, eyes open and fixed in that way that makes you speak his name twice, 3 times. He looked up when I said it the 3rd time like he was hearing me from far away. "It's not a child," he said quietly. "It wants you to think it's a child." "It's not." "What happened?" My mouth felt like I'd chewed chalk. It came inside. He looked at the door. The wood around the latch was splintered from the inside out. The line of salt he had laid, because he had, I could see the residue, was broken in a small gap like someone had blown gently and the grains had scattered. "How?" I asked, and he lifted his hand. There was a smear of dried mud along the side of his palm. I opened the door. It whistled and I opened the door without knowing I was doing it. We sat there for a long time without talking. The air had that wrong weight to it like the pressure before a storm. Finally I said, "We need help." "From who?" he asked. "A priest? A postal worker? Who handles this?" Lena found a name online. A groundskeeper who'd worked St. Mary's until last year. He was listed under a number that still had the area code from before they split the region. She called him. We met him at a diner that still had wood-paneled walls and coffee that tastes like it's been waiting for you since morning. The man was older, with hands like he'd been fixing engines his whole life. He listened like we were telling him about a leak he'd warned the landlord about years ago. When we finished, he nodded. "You hear 2 notes," he said, low and slow. "Yes," we said together. "You turned around the first time," he said. We didn't answer. He stirred his coffee. "That place has a keeper. Every place does, but not all of them mind the living. St. Mary's does. Folks started leaving little things for their dead that weren't theirs to leave. Coins taken from other graves, toys from other kids, jewelry. People think dead people share. They don't. It made something in that ground mean. Mean like a stray dog that learned to like the taste of a finger. So now there's a rule. Don't turn when it calls. Don't answer when it asks. Don't take." "We put things back," Lena said. "We apologized." He looked at her with something like pity. "It's not about fairness. It's about attention. You looked once. It knows you now. What do we do?" I asked. He thought about it. "You can move. You can change your name. People do when they can't shake a thing. Or you can starve it." "How?" Marco asked. "Don't feed it," the man said simply. "No attention. No answering. No looking through peepholes, no checking the prints, no wiping them away like you're bothered. Just let them dry and blow off. No talking about it loud. No telling it you're afraid. It doesn't want blood. It wants your time, your gaze, your breath when you say, 'Who's there?' You stop giving it that, it gets bored. It finds someone else who will." "That's it?" Troy asked. "Just ignore the thing at my door?" "That's it," the man said. "If you can. Most people can't." We paid for his coffee and thanked him like he'd given us a cure. He hadn't, not really. But sometimes having a rule is enough to make the dark smaller. We tried. For weeks we tried. The whistle came and we pretended not to hear. It whistled from behind me while I locked my bike and I hummed a song under my breath and kept my eyes on the chain. It whistled under Lena's window while she did her makeup, and she moved the brush like nothing in the world had changed. It whistled in the stairwell at Marco's work, and he took the elevator without looking over his shoulder. At Troy's door, the prints came and went, and he simply stepped over them, the way you step over a crack when you remember being a kid and thinking the sidewalk had rules. Sometimes that made it worse. It would whistle and then wait, and the silence would stretch, and the space inside that silence felt like a mouth opening. My throat would itch with the need to clear it, to say, "I hear you," to admit the world had shifted and I wanted it to shift back. But we starved it. We starved it like you starve a stray cat that's getting bolder by your back door. The taps got less frequent. The mud prints spaced out by days, then weeks. I kept the line of salt by habit and then out of superstition, and then just because it felt like a little fence I could draw when everything else was porous. 2 months after St. Mary's, I had a good day that felt like a day from the old life. I went for a run. I made dinner. I texted dumb memes to the group and they sent dumb memes back. I went to sleep with the window cracked to let in the night air. Around 2 a.m., something woke me. Not a sound. The absence of one. I lay there realizing what I wasn't hearing, and then I heard it. 2 notes, low and slow, from my phone. I picked it up not because I wanted to see, but because that's what we all do now when we're scared. The lock screen was dark. No notifications. The whistle came again from the speaker, soft as if someone were standing over me, whistling into the space between the phone and my face. It wasn't loud enough to wake a neighbor. It was just for me. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. I didn't move until dawn. When I turned the phone over in the morning, there were 3 tiny, perfect fingerprints in dried mud on the glass. Not prints, smears. Like someone had tried to touch their reflection, and the oil on the screen had caught what they were. I didn't wipe them away. I bought a new phone the next day and left the old one in a shoebox at the back of my closet. I thought about taking it back to St. Mary's and burying it there, but that felt like giving it a present I couldn't afford. People love an ending. We want the priest to say the Latin and the thing to dissolve like smoke. We want the ghost to be a metaphor we can fix with a conversation about grief. We want a flashlight to find nothing, and the nothing to mean we imagined it, and imagining to mean it can't hurt us. I don't have that for you. I have a rule I follow the way you follow other people's prayers when they bow their heads and you don't. When I hear those 2 notes, low and slow, I don't turn. If the tap comes, I sit very still and wait for it to forget me. I don't go near St. Mary's anymore, and if I have to drive past it, I keep my eyes on the road and my hands at 10 and 2, like a teenager hoping to pass a test. Sometimes late at night when the whole building is a held breath, I still hear it. Not often. just enough to remind me the meeting in that dark room never ended. We were the ones who left early. A week ago, I found a small metal whistle on the hood of my car when I came out of a grocery store. It was silver, dulled by age with a little cross engraved on one side. The sunlight made it look clean, harmless. For a second, I pictured picking it up, feeling its weight, wondering about the sound it would make in my mouth. I didn't touch it. I got in, closed the door, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I watched a kid, maybe 8 or 9, walk up to the whistle, pick it up, and turn it over in his hand like treasure. His dad called his name from the other side of the lane. The boy put the whistle to his lips and blew. I kept driving. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back. I don't know if that makes me a coward or wise. I only know the sound followed me down the street for half a block and then slipped away into the noise of other lives. And when I pulled into my lot and turned off the engine, the world was so quiet I could hear my own breath, slow and low like a tune someone used to call me home. I don't scare easy. I grew up in a house where my dad fell asleep to true crime documentaries and my mom worked nights at the hospital. So I learned to make friends with quiet, empty rooms and cheap coffee. When money got tight, a buddy told me about a night security job on the edge of town. A cemetery and the little municipal complex next to it. Grounds shed, office, storage, a cinder block restroom building, chain link fence, the basics. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The town was small enough that after midnight you could hear a train 5 miles out, like it was passing through your living room. I figured it would be one of those jobs where most of the time nothing happened, and you paid attention because it was your job, not because anything demanded it. My shift was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Tuesday through Saturday. The cemetery had motion sensor lights along the main lanes and an old camera system with a tiny delay that made everything feel like it was happening to someone else, 2 seconds in the future. The office, a single-story prefab with a front desk, was where the monitors sat. The door had a little vestibule with a window and a bell you couldn't turn off. If you opened the door, it dinged every single time. The first night, the supervisor, Marla, walked me around with a flashlight and a set of jangly keys that looked like a medieval ring. She did the quick clip tour people do after years of practice, fence line, utility gates, where the sprinklers accidentally spray the path after 3 a.m., the camera blind spots, the code for the ground shed. She was the kind of woman who kept a folded towel under her coffee mug to catch drips and left 2 cough drops lined like bullets next to the keyboard. "It's a good place," she said. "The mourners are always polite. Late at night, you get teens drifting in to dare each other sometimes. No hero stuff. You call the non-emergency number if anyone pushes it. Got it? Do you spook easy? Not really." "Everyone says that," she said and smiled without warmth. "Okay, radio check with dispatch every hour. Notes in the log if you see anything off. Do a lap at the top of every hour if it isn't storming. And one more thing." She paused at the office window and tapped the glass with a knuckle. "Keep this locked when you're inside. The air vent whines when the wind's wrong. It sounds like whistling. It's just the vent. Don't let your brain make it something else." The first week was uneventful. I did my laps, noted sprinklers, texted my friend a picture of the fog that piled up around 2 a.m. like a tide rolling in across the low stones. I learned the names on the nearest headstones like neighbors. Wanda L., 1953-2015, loved lemon cake. Sergeant Eric R., 1979-2003, our son, our star. There's a hush in a cemetery at night that isn't the same as other quiet. It's like the air has weight, like it doesn't want to carry sound too far in case it disturbs anyone. I kept reminding myself those were ideas, not facts. Ideas don't keep doors shut or turn knobs. Ideas can be walked through. I met the groundskeeper, Earl, on a Thursday afternoon as I was finishing my shift. He had a white beard that seemed to have made separate peace with gravity, and a sun-creased face like dry river mud. He'd been there longer than the map, he claimed. He gave me a nod and a plastic grocery bag full of lost and found items. A child's mitten, a cheap silver ring with a bent band, a yellow toy car missing one wheel. "People leave things, they come back looking," he said. "Sometimes they don't, no shame in that. Grief makes you forgetful." He said the office used to be an actual caretaker's cottage, back when the town was small enough that the cemetery needed constant hands nearby. A family had lived here before they moved the road and widened the fence. The old cottage had a kitchen and a bedroom under where the monitors were now. The bedroom window was the one by the door, the one with the bell. That night, around 1:40 a.m., I was in the office writing down a note about a broken padlock on the south gate when I heard it, clear as a recorded message played directly behind my right ear. A giggle. High-pitched, bright, quick, a child's laugh. I snapped my head toward the door. The bell hadn't dinged. The lock was set. The window showed only my reflection over a faint smear of the parking lot light. I clicked through the cameras. North lane, south lane, central path, maintenance shed, fence line. Nothing moving, nothing unusual. I told myself it was a bird. I told myself it was a fragment of someone's TV from a house on the hill, bouncing weird off the fog. I told myself a lot in that hour. At 2 I did my lap. The fog had thickened enough that my flashlight showed a column of air like lit dust. The stones rose and fell in little terraces, and my boots made a soft sound in the grass. I passed the children's section, small markers with lambs and stars etched into them, and I made a point not to read the dates. It's a habit everyone eventually picks up. Don't add the arithmetic to your head at night. I noticed a bouquet had tipped over, water darkening the soil like a shadow. I righted it. On the way back, I passed the office from the outside and checked the door. Locked. The next night, the laugh came again at almost the same time. So close to the same time that I glanced at the clock afterward and watched the numbers flip as if that mattered. It was the same cadence, the same high tilt at the end, like a kid who'd been surprised by a joke. This time the vent whine was going too, and my brain did what brains do. It glued them together. Whistle and giggle, wind and breath, a shape from the corner into the center. I spun slowly, trying to catch my own mind in the act of tricking me. Again, nothing on the cameras, I told Marla the next afternoon as she was jotting the schedule. Could be an animal, she said without looking up. Sure, could be someone messing with you. The kids hide and throw sounds. That window it carries, it sounded close. They always do, she said, and tore off the schedule to put it on the corkboard. Then she paused. If you're worried, switch out with Luis on Fridays. He likes the graveyard shift because he's got a kid at home and sleeps better during the day. I'm not worried. Everyone says that, she said again, same not smile. Still, you hear anything that sounds like your name, you call? That Friday, I did switch with Luis as an experiment. He arrived with a thermos and a pack of peanut butter crackers and the kind of tired eyes only parents and new puppies give you. We talked for a few minutes about nothing, really, and he headed out for a lap while I watched the monitors to see if anything would creep into his periphery. The fog lifted early that night. The lawn silvered in the moonlight like frost, though it wasn't anywhere near cold enough. I was doing the petty math of how long I could go without making more coffee when the office bell dinged. I flinched hard enough to knock a pen to the floor. The door was still closed. The bell had rung anyway, a single bright note like the back of a spoon tapping glass. I stared at the seam of the door. Sometimes the metal latch would retract a hair if the building settled just right, Marla had said once. Sometimes the bell wire had its own mind. It was possible the building did what old buildings do. It was also possible that what makes a bell ring is a hand. My radio hissed. Front office? Luis said, you copy? I copy, I said, annoyed at how breathy I sounded. Got something weird by the children's lane. Come take a look. I locked the office behind me. The walk felt longer than it was. The moon had gone behind a thin film of cloud, turning everything from silver to gray. Luis stood with his hands in his pockets looking down. At his feet, 5 small coins. Pennies had been stacked into a shaky tower on the corner of a stone like a game in progress. Beside them, the yellow toy car from Earl's bag sat nose down in the grass as if a kid had let go mid-vroom. I crouched and touched the toy. It was damp like everything else and a little gritty. Earl messing with us? I asked. Earl doesn't stay past 4, Luis said. And he doesn't joke. He nudged the coins with his shoe, knocking them over. I once found a half-eaten cookie on a stone out here, like someone had taken exactly 1 bite. You'd be surprised by what mourners do when they think no one's watching. We made another circle of the section, our flashlights making little islands. Nothing else stood out. Back in the office, the door lock sat exactly as I'd left it. On the inside of the window where the light hit just right, there was a smear at knee height like a handprint dragged sideways. I wiped it with my sleeve and chalked it up to condensation from my breath. At 3:12 a.m., the radio crackled again, but it wasn't Luis. It was that same high, bright sound, close to the speaker. A brief burst of a laugh so clean and sudden that I reacted with my whole body, turning and hitting my hip on the desk. "Luis," I said into the mic. A different voice came back, an irritable drawl from dispatch. "Control to cemetery. You got a hot mic? You key up over there?" "No," I said, one eye on the radio as if it might grow teeth. "We're getting interference." "Copy," the dispatcher said, clearly not invested. "Keep it off channel when possible." I went outside and did a short, fast loop just to shake off the feeling. I told myself I'd slept badly and primed my mind to jump. I told myself not to embarrass myself in front of Luis. People like us carry odd stories like lint. Tell enough of them and you're the guy no one trusts with a second set of keys. At 4 a.m., I was leaning back in the office chair when I heard it again. The giggle, no radio, no wind. Just behind me and to the right, the exact spot where the old cottage's bedroom would have been if Earl's memory was right. I turned slowly this time because sudden movements made me feel foolish. I looked at my reflection in the window and, because I could not help it, I looked past it at the faint dark of the parking lot. The reflection of the office lights made floating squares, and in those squares my face hovered, a little too pale, a little too still. Right under my reflected chin, under where my collarbone would be in the glass, were 2 handprints on the inside of the window, small ones. They were perfectly formed in the dust that gathers no matter how much you wipe, all 5 fingers splayed. The heel of the palm pressed like someone had stood just under the sill and leaned up. The right hand overlapped the left, the way kids do when they're trying to peer over a counter. I stood there long enough that a moth bumped the glass and startled me into moving. I touched the prints. The dust smudged just like dust, nothing cold flared from the glass, no dramatic breath. It was almost banal that way, which made it worse. I wiped them away and then looked at my clean fingers as if they might tell me they'd made a mistake touching that. The next morning, I told Earl. He nodded like someone who'd been waiting to nod. "History sits down whether you invite it or not," he said. "That's not really helpful," I said. "There was a girl," he said after a second. "Long time back. Family that lived in the cottage. Pneumonia took her. Winter was hard that year. They used to set pennies on the sill to make her laugh. The old caretaker couldn't stand silence. Why, how long ago?" He shrugged. "Before my first hip. Before your mom even thought about your dad. Everyone wants to tell the story," I said. "No one wants to sign their name to it." He laughed once, a dry bark. "Towns like that." For the next week, the laugh came every night. Never more than twice, never at exactly the same minute, but always in that hour between 2 and 3 when the trains were gone and even the animals had given up on moving around. I tried everything I could think of that wouldn't get me fired. I set my phone to record and left it on the desk while I stepped outside. When I listened back, all I got was the rustle of paper and the low hum of the soda machine. I wiped the inside of the window with cleaner until the scent stung my nose. The next night, the handprints came back after I heard the laugh, like the laugh needed them to exist. I brought Luis in on it. He stood in the office with me, coffee steaming. "If this is a prank, it's old school," he said. "No fishing line, no Bluetooth speaker. Just the straight stuff. You hear it?" I asked. "I heard something," he said. "Could have been a bird. Could have been a TV. Could have been a kid playing. Could have been nothing. You're not helpful. You want helpful?" he said. "Turn the radio off for 10 minutes. If it laughs when the radio's off, we rule that out." We did. It laughed anyway, as if to point out how little we understood what mattered. He didn't come back the following Friday. He said his daughter had a fever and he needed the sleep. I didn't push. That Saturday, Marla asked me to sit with a family who'd gotten permission to visit a grave after hours. Their grandma's birthday, they said, and they wanted a little time alone to sing a hymn. I kept my distance. Watched them bring a candle in one of those red glass cups. The smallest girl, 4 maybe, set a yellow toy car on the base of the stone and patted it twice like she was telling it to stay. When they left, she forgot it and I jogged to catch up. She smiled huge when I handed it back. That night, the car sat on the office desk after my shift and I couldn't tell you how. I hadn't put it there. No one else had the desk key except Marla, and she'd gone home sick around 9. I picked it up. It was a different car than Earl's. This one had all its wheels and a little chip in the paint like a tooth missing. I put it on the sill with the others' things in the lost and found bag. At 2:46 a.m., the office doorbell chimed. I was looking right at it. The door didn't move. The lock didn't shift. The chime sounded as though someone had swung it open wide and let it whisper back to the jam. Then the lights on the monitors went soft, a flicker that wasn't a power loss but a heartbeat through the system. In that tiny glitch, every camera image lagged just enough that, for a breath, I saw a shadow step through the central path 2 seconds before the sensor light kicked on. It looked like someone small cutting across the gravel to save time. I stepped outside. I don't know why. Maybe because fear works on a loop and breaking it sometimes means walking straight into it. The air was still. The fog was gone. You could make out the relief of the angels' faces on the taller stones and the dark hollows of the inscriptions. In the children's section, a line of sprinklers had left diamonds in the grass. They were interrupted by a track of lighter spots like something small had walked through and disturbed the beads of water. Not a raccoon, not a cat. Bare feet. I followed them until they vanished on the path. On the corner of a stone, 5 pennies had been stacked again, this time with care. I felt that small, absurd urge to say something aloud to the air. Thanks or hello or please. Please what? Please stop, please go. Please tell me where you are when I'm not here. A sound came from the restroom building then, the soft echoing clack of a stall door bumping the divider. The building is just a shape of block in the dark, with a single slanted roof like a cheap hat. The door was propped open by a rubber wedge. I stood in the doorway and turned on my flashlight before I went in, shining it along the floor to catch feet if there were feet. There were none. The last stall's door shivered against its latch as if a draft moved just it. I tapped it with the back of my fingers. It stopped, and for a weird second I felt rude, like I'd interrupted someone. I stayed until morning, and when I signed the log, my handwriting looked like someone else's, too neat, too careful. On Monday, I came in to find a post-it from Marla stuck to the monitor. Stop leaving coins on stones. Families complain. I almost laughed. I almost wrote back, it isn't me. I didn't. I moved the pennies into the drawer and told myself I'd stop making a story out of noise. 2 nights passed without the laugh. Silence can be generous or mean, depending on what you want from it. By the second night, I missed the ridiculous certainty of 2 sour 3 on a.m. The absence made me more jittery than the presence had. I did extra laps. I checked the south fence twice. I clinked the office keys against each other when my hands felt too empty. The third night, a storm rolled in from the west. No thunder, just a long, steady rain that sounded like 1,000 fingers drumming on tin. The cams got a wash of glitch in the corners where the drops pooled. I sat with my jacket on and a towel across my knees to keep from feeling like I was in a leaking boat. The laugh came at 2:03 a.m., crisp and impossible through the rain. Another followed it, a hair lower, like the first had been answered. Each one seemed to come from a different point in the small office, as if the sound were moving in a circle. The hair on my arms lifted so quickly it hurt. Then something tapped the glass of the inside window. 3 light taps, the sound of a fingernail on the pane. I stared at my own reflected eyes and wanted to look away but didn't. The taps came again. 1, 2, 3, lower, almost knee-height. Okay, I said aloud, because silence shapes you into someone you don't want to be. Okay, that's enough. The doorbell chimed. The lock held. The radio hissed like someone had blown across a bottle. It was so absurd I began to laugh, and then I surprised myself by crying a little. One of those tight, stupid spills you get when you've been steady too long. And then a commercial about a dog and a soldier knocks your legs out. I sat there with my head down and the towel balled in my fists and let the rain fill in the shape of me. The next morning, I found tiny handprints in the dust on the office window again, clearer than before. And this time they weren't the only ones. My own had joined them. A perfect overlay where I'd leaned in the night before to see, my larger hands bracketing the small ones. It looked like I'd been shown how to match a game and had done it without thinking. That afternoon, between showers, I walked the children's section while Earl trimmed along the path with his weed whacker and pretended not to watch me. I stopped at a stone I'd always avoided reading. The name was Lily, the dates short. Someone had left a button with a cartoon cat on it and a handful of pennies, scattered, not stacked. I thought about that family singing. I thought about the yellow car. I thought about what it means to work all night at the place where everyone eventually goes, even the ones who stop laughing too soon. Weeks passed. The laugh never happened when anyone else was in the office with me, though a couple of times dispatch got interference when my radio wasn't clipped to my belt. I told no one else. People have thresholds for what they can hold and then go back to folding laundry, and I didn't want to test where mine ended. I changed small habits, the way you do when you make room for something you don't want to admit you live with. I left 1 penny on the sill at the start of each shift and put it back in the drawer before dawn. I kept the yellow car in the bag, but the bag stayed on the desk, not in the drawer. I stopped sitting with my back to the window after 2 a.m. One night, late in my time there, Marla had to come in because the storm siren's test got stuck and wailed for an hour. She brought coffee and a new pack of pens, muttering about budgets. I watched her look at the window and then deliberately not look again. In the reflection, our faces lined up so that for a second I had her mouth and she had my eyes. "Ever hear anything weird?" I asked her, casual as I could. "Define weird," she said. "Kid stuff." She stared at her coffee, then at me. "Sometimes," she said. "If I do, I say goodnight out loud and I lock the drawer with the coins and I go home on time." "That's it?" "That's the job," she said. "You write what you can write. You leave what you have to leave. I didn't keep the job forever. Security is a ladder with missing rungs, and I found one I could step up to at the distribution center by the highway, where the night sounds are forklifts and the smell is cardboard and coffee. On my last night, I did my lap and said the names I knew out loud. A small kindness to myself more than anyone else, I guess. At Lily's Stone, I left the yellow toy car. I placed it nose out like a race about to begin. I stacked 5 pennies on the corner. The tower wobbled and held. The rain from earlier had left the air smelling like wet concrete and cut grass. Back in the office, I wiped the inside of the window as clean as I could get it. My fingerprints made little crescent smudges. I wiped those too. It felt ritualistic and silly at the same time. I turned in my keys to Marla, who nodded without looking up from the screen, which was her version of a hug. Earl shook my hand outside by the shed and left his palm on mine a second longer than necessary. "You listen good," he said. "Most folks don't. That should be the end." It mostly is. 6 months later, I was living across town, sleeping odd hours because the distribution center schedule had no mercy, and I got woken at 2:18 a.m. by my upstairs neighbor's TV leaking through the ceiling. A sitcom laugh track. I lay there and tried to breathe through the familiar irritation, but my mind kept trying to sort the sound. After a minute, the TV went off. The laugh that came next wasn't on a speaker. It was in the stairwell, bouncing off the painted concrete like it had found a new toy. High-pitched, brief, bright. I sat up so fast I gave myself a head rush. I told myself it was the building settling. I told myself it was a kid in the unit across from the foyer. I told myself a lot. When I went out the next morning, there were tiny handprints in the dust on the mailbox bank. You could say kids run their hands along everything. That's true. The prints were lower than most kids' hands would be unless they were leaning up on tiptoe. I stood there with my key in my fingers and thought about pennies and windows and how dust keeps its own kind of diary when it feels like it. I haven't gone back to the cemetery since. I keep meaning to, if only to say hi to Earl and to pretend I'm stopping by for paperwork. Sometimes, shopping in dollar stores, I catch myself at the pegboard with the toy cars, the cheap ones in impossibly bright colors, and I frown at the paint like I'm looking for a chip I recognize. On nights when the train runs at the right time and the air in the apartment gets that heavy, tuned down feeling like a radio station between frequencies, I'll hear something, a clink on the counter, the tiniest slide of a coin, and I will tell myself a story about vents and wind and neighbors, and I will believe it enough to sleep. But if I pass a playground when the sky is turning that blue that only happens right before dawn, I find myself slowing down. I listen for a laugh that's too eager for that hour, the kind that doesn't need company. And if I hear it, in a grocery store aisle or a parking garage or not at all, just the shape of it empty of air, I do what Marla taught me. I say goodnight out loud. To no one, to the part of the air that knows my name. I lock the drawer in my kitchen that holds the coins, a habit I developed without meaning to. I go to bed on time. And in the morning, if there are tiny handprints on the inside of the window over the sink, I wipe them away and don't measure them against mine. I don't want to know how well they would line up. I don't want to know if they're still a little damp like they came from someone who had been laughing in the rain. My Uncle Joel never told stories to scare us. He was the kind of man who folded his receipts by size and kept a spare comb in the glove compartment. He worked 15 years at a funeral home off the highway, the kind of brick building you only notice when you need it. with tinted windows and a line of low hedges that were always too square. When I was a kid, people at family gatherings would ask him morbid questions and he'd answer straight, like a mechanic explaining a faulty water pump. Grief makes people nosy. He respected that. He respected the dead. He didn't believe in ghosts. He didn't tell me this one until I was 23, the week I helped him clear out his storage unit after his divorce. It was late. We were sitting on the tailgate, box cutters sticking out of our back pockets like tail feathers. He rubbed a thumb along a nick in the steel and said, "You like those no-sleep things, right? Here's one you won't like," and he told me about the coffin that moved. It was late. It's October. He knew the date because of a weird half-off pumpkin sale sign that had blown into the parking lot and stuck against the chain-link fence all day, and he was on a night shift with 2 coworkers, Rick, who chewed toothpicks until they looked like little brooms, and Mina, who wore compression gloves and said they made her hands feel hugged. The director, Mr. Klein, had gone home at 9. There was a twilight viewing scheduled for 6:30, then a late transfer to the cemetery because the family wanted the burial before dawn. Religious thing. The cemetery didn't usually allow night burials, but Klein knew the groundskeeper in Cache has a way of loosening policy. The deceased was a man in his 70s named John Vega. Not the worst case Joel had seen. No trauma, no complicated restoration. Embalming had gone smoothly the day before. He told me all that not to be gross, but to make a point. There was nothing unusual about the body. Sometimes the unusual ones bring unusual energy into the room. That's how people talk when they need reasons for a feeling. But this man was ordinary in death the way most of us hope to be. Shirt buttoned straight, mouth set in a soft line, hands folded over a rosary that wasn't his but looked like it could have been. The family had chosen a simple walnut coffin with brass handles and a pale liner that made Joel think of fresh hotel sheets. The viewing went fine, except for the air conditioner. It had a habit of clicking off and then back on with a rattle like a metal ruler being flicked. When it did, a chill rolled across the carpet and someone would always whisper, "He's here," or "She's here," depending the way people do when they want a ghost to make this harder than it already is. Joel hated that. "Air is air," he'd say later. It moves. But he kept it to himself that night. The Vega family stood in clumps, quiet, using up boxes of tissues with that careful politeness grief demands in public. At 7:30, the last person left, and Joel locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. They had an hour to get the coffin from the chapel to the prep room and then to the van. The cemetery wanted the burial done by 11, before the grounds flooded with dew and the backhoe got temperamental. Joel and Rick wheeled the coffin onto a rolling bier and steered it down the hall. The prep room smelled like wintergreen and metal. Mina was there, tidying instruments that were already tidy. 10-minute break, Rick said. "Smoke?" Joel didn't smoke, but he liked the ritual of standing by the loading bay with a paper cup of coffee and the orange tip of a cigarette glowing in the dark like a cautious lighthouse. The lot was quiet. Highway noise came and went like wind on a far lake. A moth kept bumping the yellow bulb overhead and leaving a powder dust on the plastic cover. It was one of those airless nights where the moon looks pasted up there and your own breath tastes like dust. 10 minutes turned into 15. They weren't slacking. You learn there that time moves weird around grief. You stretch moments because the next ones will ask you to carry things. Finally, Mina said, "Okay, let's do it," and they went in. The coffin had moved, not a little. Not a jostle from the wheels rolling when someone leaned on it. Joel knew the weight and balance of those things like you know the weight of a hammer you've swung 1,000 times. It had been centered under the prep room light when they left. Now it was 2 feet to the right, skewed, so one corner was almost touching the metal cabinet where the suturing kits were kept. The bier's wheels were locked. Mina checked them, crouching, pressing each lever with the side of her hand. Rick frowned around his toothpick. "Who came in?" He said, "No one," Mina said. She pointed to the security monitor mounted in the corner. It showed 4 black and white squares: loading bay, hallway, chapel lobby. The hallway feed showed the closed door of the prep room. No shape had passed. Joel said maybe the locks weren't really down when they left. Maybe the floor is uneven. Maybe gravity got experimental. They moved it back. It made the familiar damp hush across the tiles, not the screech of metal when something drags. Joel's stomach did what it does when you miss a stair. "Sensors can glitch," Rick muttered. But he said it in the way of a man repeating a thing to block out another thing. They set the lid in the half-open position that families prefer, And Joel looked at Mr. Vega's face and felt a brief stab of something like guilt. Over what, he couldn't say. The man's mouth looked softer now, like he was remembering a joke. Joel checked the corners of the lid for any swell or shift that would make it unbalanced. Everything was normal. He felt the liner near the shoulders. Dry, cool. He pivoted to sign the transfer form on the clipboard, and while his pen was still on the paper, the prep room door shuddered in its frame. It wasn't a thing you could blame on wind, because the loading bay door was down and the window didn't open. It sounded like someone had leaned against it from the hallway. Rick went and opened it. No one was there. The hallway camera showed nobody. The thermostat clicked and that metal ruler rattle passed through the vents. "Let's just go," Mina said. "We're past schedule." Joel and Rick lifted. He remembers the exact weight, they all did. You carry enough coffins and you start keeping score against yourself, the way movers do with sofas and bookcases. It was heavy but even. They carried it to the elevator, the service one at the back that always made noises like a cat trying to get a hairball up. The door slid shut. The fluorescent light blinked once, twice. Mina stabbed B for basement because the loading bay sat half a level down. The button stuck and popped back with a soft click. Halfway down, the elevator stopped. All three of them froze with that very particular stillness people adopt when a normal thing might become a problem. The light pulsed. The fan hum faltered. Rick swore. Joel pressed the red button and got a recorded voice telling him to remain calm, and that maintenance was en route. It wasn't, of course. It was just a loop. And anyway, the coffin was resting partly on the metal floor, partly balanced against Joel's thigh. "Can you just," Mina said, and Joel shifted. And as he did, he felt the coffin rock. Not the roll you get when you move your weight. Not the underlying momentum. A rock like something inside adjusted. He looked at Rick. Rick looked away. "Open the lid," Rick said after a moment. "Just make sure the pillow didn't shift." You know how they slide? It wasn't common, but it happened. The interior fixtures sometimes shifted during transport if someone had been generous with the liner and stingy with the pins. Joel set his fingers on the lip of the lid and lifted the inch to clear the latch. The hinge creaked. He lifted it another inch. Cold air breathed out. The way air breathes out from a refrigerator you forgot to shut. It smelled like carnations and something sterilized. He lifted the lid to mid-chest level. The face inside was exactly where faces always are. The expression was the same. The rosary lay where they'd put it. But the lining under the shoulders had a crease now that hadn't been there. A single angled buckle like the kind you get when something heavy slides 2 inches and stops. Joel shut the lid. The elevator started moving. No one said anything until the doors opened onto the loading bay. Then Rick said, "Mechanical," and it sounded idiotic in the big concrete quiet. They wheeled the coffin to the van, locked the beer, and took a breath because that is what you do whenever you change a level with the dead. Joel glanced back at the security monitor above the door. The basement camera was a different angle. It watched the bay, the elevator, and a corner of the room where old floral arrangements went to shed petals. The monitor showed the three of them, small and grainy. Then it showed something else. The coffin rolling slowly, inching forward as if being encouraged by a slope that didn't exist. "Hey," Joel said. The others looked. On the screen, the coffin kept moving. In real life, it didn't. It sat locked and sensible in front of them. The screen image had a delay sometimes. He told himself that. He told himself a lot of things. Then the image caught up. For a heartbeat, the coffin on the screen overlapped the real one, and his head did that floaty thing it did after he gave blood. "Glitch," Mina said. She said it quickly like a counterspell. "Let's load up." The groundskeeper at the cemetery was a man named Brian who kept a radio in his breast pocket like a heart replacement. He met them at the gate with a flashlight and a thermos and that smudged, apologetic smile people wearing uniforms wear when they know they're bending the rules. "We're lucky," he said. "Moon's good. Makes the deer stand still." He said that like it was a good omen. Joel filed it away under "Don't think about wild animals." They backed the van to a neat rectangle of earth. The backhoe idled beside it. Its arm relaxed like a sleeping insect. The headstones around them came up at regular intervals. Mostly old names, mostly born before color television. A cluster of oaks leaned over the lot like old men sharing a secret. They lifted the coffin out. Joel felt the weight settle and shift. He told himself it was just the way a human body resists the idea of being carried. They set it on the lowering device, the straps crossing like belts. Brian flipped a switch and the mechanism whirred with a low, almost polite sound. The coffin began to descend. It stopped after a foot. Brian frowned. "Sometimes the straps do this," he said. He went to the controls and toggled the switch, and the straps released a bite more. The coffin descended another 6 inches. Then it jerked upward, just a tiny fraction, like something had pulled back. Joel saw it. So did Rick. So did Mina. She swallowed and said, "Strap caught." Even though Joel could see the straps, even though they were smooth and straight. "Pull it up," Rick said. "Reset." Brian reversed the motor and the coffin rose obediently, a foot, then 2. It hung over the mouth of the grave like a guest who's changed his mind about entering a house. The night pressed in loud with crickets and the far-off Doppler of a truck on the highway. Joel felt the air in his ears, cold and wet. He looked at the lid, which was latched, then at the lower seam where the lid met the base. For a moment he thought he saw a line there, like the shadow thickened. He decided not to mention it. They reset the straps. They started the descent again. 3 feet down, the motor hiccuped and the coffin slid obediently for 1 more foot and then stopped. Brian kicked the switch box gently like a man coaxing a TV. He said, "She's an old unit." And Joel thought of the elevator and wanted to laugh. "Okay," Rick said. He put his palm flat on the lid. "Okay." The lid kissed the heel of his hand from underneath. It was nothing more than a whisper. A soft hollow thump, the way wood makes noise when interior pressure widens a seam. It could have been the shift of air, the give of liner. It could have been anything you wanted. But it came from inside, and it pressed back against the fleshy base of Rick's thumb with intention. He jerked his hand away and said, "Nope," with a voice that belonged to a man telling a stray dog to stay. No one made the joke. No one said, "He's not restless, he's deceased." Joel stepped back. His shoes scuffed dirt. He had an impulse to knock on the lid and say something human and dumb like, "We've got you." He didn't. The backhoe idled, clearing its throat like an impatient animal. Mina said, "Very carefully, I need to open it." Brian flinched. "Family sign-off. We can't lower it like that," she said. If the seal, I need to check." She looked at Joel when she said he, and he nodded because saying no felt worse. They had a key for the latch because you always do on a night like that. It was small and felt like nothing in Joel's fingers. They cranked. The latch released with that same neat sound he'd heard 1,000 times. Joel slid his fingers under the lip and lifted. It stuck, then gave. He lifted it to the angle where you can see a face without showing the whole room. He saw something ordinary and something not. The ordinary part was the face. The skin pale and still. The eyelids closed in that faintly rounded way that looks like sleep if you lie to yourself. The not ordinary part was the rosary. It wasn't over the folded hands anymore. It lay tangled against the left wrist like someone had tried to grab it and missed. Mina noticed the same thing and her mouth snapped shut, not in fear but in a kind of offended surprise. She reached in, the way you reach into a box of delicate ornaments, and she moved the rosary back. As she did, she said very softly, "Okay, Mr. Vega. Okay, don't worry." It was a soothing voice she probably used on living people who were shaking. Rick said, "Close it," and she did. She latched it again. She stepped back and wiped her palms on her compression gloves as if they were sweaty. Joel tried to find something to do with his hands and settled on pretending to dust dirt off his sleeves. They lowered the coffin the rest of the way. Joel watched, expecting another halt, but the mechanism behaved and the wood slid out of the light and into the shadow. The thump at the bottom sounded softer than usual. He told himself it only sounded that way because he was listening for the wrong things. They did what they always do. Brian worked the backhoe. The scoop moved earth in slow, dignified arcs. Rick and Joel and Mina used the shovels to neaten the mound because there are things you do for families that they'll never see, and you do them anyway. Joel had the sense of being watched, and when he looked up, the cemetery saw him back. Lines of stone with stories reduced to numbers, trees rubbing their hands together. He hated that his brain was writing lines like that. When they were done, Brian tamped the last layer with a flat tool that looked like a wide foot. He made a cross with it without thinking, like a baker marking a loaf. He nodded once at the place and said, "Night," the way you do when you leave a room with someone sleeping. On the drive back, no one spoke. Joel watched the shoulder stripes fly by and thought that if he saw someone standing between the trees, he would quit his job and never say why. He didn't. The world went on being normal and ugly and kind. Back at the funeral home, Joel signed the final line on the form, his pen leaving a thin groove in the paper where his hand shook. The security monitor in the basement still showed its 4 black and white squares. He looked out of habit. The top right square, the chapel, showed the empty room, rows of chairs with the exactness of teeth. The top left showed the lobby, still and clean. The bottom left showed the hallway. The bottom right showed the loading bay. In the bottom right, a coffin rolled across the floor. He didn't react right away because the brain can't handle a contradiction without deciding to be stupid for a second. He just watched his own empty loading bay contain an action. The coffin in the image rolled until it was pressed against the door. Just like he would tell me later, it had been propped as if to block someone from leaving, only it wasn't. In reality, the space was empty except for a smear of pollen where the moth had died. The image wasn't live, it couldn't be live. The timestamp in the corner said 21:32, it was 23:49. Replay feed, Joel said, and Mina, who knew the system better, said, "There's no replay," but her voice said she was lying to herself. Rick walked closer to the screen. He tapped the glass. The image fuzzed and resolved, and now it was the hallway view that showed something. A shadow passing, long and thin like a person carrying a ladder. Only no one was in the hallway. The vacuum cleaner stood there with its cord wound like a snake asleep. Joel climbed the 4 steps to the little closet where the DVR lived. A plastic device with exactly 1 button. People instinctively press when they want things to work. He pressed it. The screen went blank and then flipped to the camera menu. He scrolled. He selected loading bay. The screen showed live feed now, just the empty concrete, the square of metal where the elevator door would open. He selected hallway, live empty. He selected prep room. The image appeared in gray. The table, the clean counters, the spot where the coffin had been. On the monitor, for 1/2 second, the prep room door moved. It didn't swing. It didn't shake. It moved the way a thing looks different when you blink, and it manages to shift in the blink so you can never say for sure. Joel felt a pain at the back of his neck like a rubber band snapping. He shut the monitor off. He said, "We're done." And he meant both the night and the story of the night. He told Mr. Klein about it the next day in the same tone he'd used to say the copier was eating paper. Klein listened with the patience of a man who'd heard things like this from other night crews, and who had his own drawer of explanations. He walked them to the prep room. He studied the floor. "Slight grade," he said. "We should have that leveled." He looked at the camera system. "These are old. We'll replace." He said the words like he was sanding the burrs off the memory. Joel asked about Mr. Vega's family. "They come by today," he said. Klein said yes, very calm, and that they were grateful, and that's all. Joel went home. He slept badly. In the morning, he avoided his bathroom mirror for longer than you'd think relevant. Nothing else happened at work that month. The new camera system went in. It had color and a nicer font for the timestamp. The floor got leveled. The elevator got serviced. Joel carried more coffins and told himself you don't take one strange minor night and make it the headline of your life. 2 weeks later, a card came in the mail addressed to the funeral home. It was from the Vega family. Klein taped it up by the microwave with the others, because people like to see proof that care matters. Joel read it while his soup spiraled in the glass bowl. It was what those cards always are: thank you, compassion, dignity, until a line at the end. "We appreciated that you let Dad keep his rosary in his hand for the burial. He always held it when he was afraid of storms." The line wrinkled the surface of Joel's day. He had not told them about the shift. He had not told anyone. So either they were writing a thing they assumed, or someone had told them, and the only someone could have been the ground under them. He asked me that day on the tailgate what I thought it meant. I told him the sensible things because I'm a sensible person until I'm alone. And then I am not. I said air moves. Wood swells. Elevators stall. Cameras lag. I said the body vents gases and the lid flexes, and what he felt could have been that. I said grief makes meaning where there isn't any. He nodded like a man being polite with a salesman. Then he told me the part he hadn't told Klein. After they'd finished that night, after the monitor and the shutting down, Joel had gone to the prep room alone to grab his jacket from the chair. He pushed the door open with his toe, and the light came on, and everything looked as it should except for one thing. A small thing you could ignore if you wanted your night back. On the table where they do the work. on the stainless steel that never holds a fingerprint longer than a weird minute. There was a single wet mark. Not a drip. Not a spill. It was too deliberate for an accident, too shallow for meaning. It was the shape of a hand. Not caught perfectly. The curve of a palm only and a hint of 2 fingers, as if someone had steadied themselves getting up. The mark was fading even as he watched, the way breath fades on glass. He wiped it with a towel. He didn't tell anyone. He walked to the loading bay and stood very still for a full 60 seconds, the way you do when you try to hear everything at once. Then he got his keys and went home. Years passed. Joel left the funeral home and took a maintenance job at a hospital. He said the living are a bigger mess and a little better company. He keeps his comb in the glove compartment. He still folds receipts. He doesn't like air conditioners that rattle. When it storms, he puts his hands together without thinking, and sometimes his thumbs move like he's searching for beads that aren't there. Last spring, I drove past that old funeral home after meeting a friend. The brick looked smaller. The hedges were still too square. The sign out front had a new name. I parked. I don't know why. Curiosity is just another word for whatever gets you into rooms you shouldn't be in. I walked up to the door, and in the reflection of the tinted glass, I saw myself in the empty lot and the highway that doesn't belong anywhere until you need it. I pressed my fingers to the glass the way you press your fingers to a cold window when you're a kid, and want to see if your skin leaves proof. My handprint bloomed and then faded the way all handprints do. Behind the glass down the hallway, the prep room door was just a square in the dark. It didn't move. The air was air. I stood there long enough to be embarrassed. Then I went back to my car. When I turned the key, the radio came on low, catching the tail end of some nighttime host laughing. It sounded like someone had just told him a story he didn't believe, but would remember anyway. I don't know what's true. I only know what my uncle said happened and the way his voice sounded when he said it. Flatten the facts, thinner around the edges. He wasn't trying to convert me. He didn't care if I believed. He just needed it to exist somewhere besides his head. Sometimes at night I picture that coffin leaning against the loading bay door on the monitor, and I think about how cameras don't lie, and also that they lie constantly. I think about Mr. Vega and his rosary, the way a simple circle of beads can convince your hands they're not empty. I think about the handprint on steel and the mark it didn't leave on the towel, and the fact that every surface is something's breath, given a second to cool. Once, not long after he told me, I asked Joel, "What would you have done if you'd opened it and he'd been not the way he was supposed to be?" He looked at me and didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, "I'd have put the rosary where he could feel it." And I felt something warm in the middle of everything cold. I don't tell this to people to scare them. I tell it because it's a true story in the way some true stories are. Boring around the edges, the middle too simple, the ending refusing to lean one way. The world didn't crack. No one screamed and ran. A family was grateful for something they didn't know they should be grateful for. The rest is just air moving and wood swelling and someone somewhere putting a hand down to steady themselves on the way to a door. If a coffin moved, it did it the way everything moves when no one's looking. An inch, a breath, a thought you don't want to think pressing softly against your hand from the other side. I'm not sure if this belongs here, because even now I can't tell you what I experienced without feeling like I'm leaving out some obvious explanation. But I also can't sleep, and every time I close my eyes I hear that breathing again. Steady, too close, as if my ear were pressed to a door and someone were standing on the other side, waiting for me to open it. If anyone has a rational way to frame this, I'll take it. Otherwise, maybe writing it down will at least keep me from going back. This happened in late August in a town I won't name because it's small and people talk. I'd driven that back road 100 times. It's the one with the old cemetery set back from the ditch, the wrought iron fence leaning like tired elbows along the perimeter, oak trees sagging over the stones. If you live around here, you've seen it, except maybe only during the day. After dark, most folks take the highway. I usually do too. But that Wednesday, I was coming home from my friend Tyler's place, and I left later than planned. My phone had died, and the highway was backed up with night construction, so the back road felt like a shortcut I could justify even with the storm hanging around. It was about 11:30 when I turned past the small brick chapel near the corner and slowed beside the cemetery. The air felt heavy, the kind that makes your windshield haze no matter how high you crank the defroster. My headlight slid over the fence and into the stones, and that's when I saw the woman. She was standing in front of a little mausoleum, one of those square stone buildings with a metal door and two narrow windows about the size of a shed. She wore a black dress that hung straight to her ankles and a black sweater or shawl over her shoulders. Her hair looked pinned up like a cheap funeral updo, and even though the night swallowed most details, I could see the pale oval of her face turned toward the road. I slowed. I don't know why. Something about the way she stood, arms close, hands clasped at her waist, gave off this quiet desperation that cut through the usual don't-get-involved reflex. The cemetery gates were closed and chained, but a section of fence near the corner was bent up like someone had crawled under. It wasn't raining yet, but thunder rolled behind the trees. I pulled onto the shoulder and dug around for my phone before remembering I'd left it at Tyler's to charge. It felt wrong to drive off. I put the hazards on, stepped out, and called across the ditch, "Hey, are you okay?" The woman didn't move. "Not a flinch, ma'am." I tried again. She turned away from me and stepped behind the mausoleum like she'd just remembered something she'd left there. It wasn't a quick movement, more like she drifted, long dress sweeping the grass. She vanished behind the stone wall. I swore under my breath and looked up and down the road. No cars, no houses with their porch lights on, not close enough to matter. The cemetery gate was definitely locked, the chain pulled tight around both bars. But the bent section of fence near the corner was still there, and I could see a faint track in the dirt where people had crawled under before me. I know how this sounds. Dumb horror movie setup. Don't follow the figure in black into the graveyard. I'm not proud of the decision, but I also know myself well enough to remember what I felt in that moment. Ridiculous, sure, but also obligated. If you've ever had your brain switch into that stubborn help gear, you know it's a lot louder than your fear. And if she was a real woman who needed help and I drove away because I was spooked, I'd hate myself for it. I slid under the fence, tore my shirt on a rusty wire, and stood up, brushing dirt off my jeans. The grass was wet with dew and gave off that sweet green rotting smell mixed with something older. Stone dust, maybe, or the mold that grows where the sun never really reaches. I walked along the row of headstones until I reached the mausoleum. It was older than I thought, built from blocks of limestone gone soft around the edges. The door was iron, a simple rectangle with a mesh grate in the top half like a jail window. There was a name carved above the lintel. Brandor. No, Brandon. The second letter looked like it had flaked away. Brander. I crouched and rubbed a patch with my sleeve, but the lichen clung like scabs. There was a loose bouquet of plastic roses propped against the wall, blown sideways, their stems tangled with pine needles and a strip of black ribbon. I stepped around the side, expecting to find the woman there, maybe crouched or leaning out of sight. No one. The space behind the mausoleum was a narrow corridor of grass hemmed in by a hedge of holly and the backs of 3 tall monuments. No footprints in the dirt. The ground was just damp enough that I would have seen the sliding mark of a heel or the smudge of a dress hem. There was nothing, not even the toe of a shoe. I was thinking she could have rounded the back and gone the other way, so I popped back out and circled the building a full time, then a second, feeling more ridiculous by the second. "Hello?" I called out, quieter now. The cemetery didn't answer. I could hear the road humming with my hazards blinking, 2 lonely orange beetles in the dark. A cicada rattled in the oak overhead, then went silent. I started to feel stupid, like I'd let my mind get ahead of me. I told myself I'd done what I could. I'd look again from the road, and if I saw her, I don't know. I'd flag someone down, call someone's landline, anything besides wandering alone between graves in the middle of the night. I stepped backward to turn toward the fence, and something exhaled right behind my neck. It wasn't a breeze. It wasn't the highway. It was breath. Warm, damp, close enough that the tiny hairs on the back of my head lifted. The sound was steady and patient, like someone practicing to be quiet and not quite managing it. I froze. My mouth had opened on its own and I felt my jaw tremble. I didn't turn around. I wish I could say I did. I stood there with my hands lifted halfway like I'd been caught taking something, and I whispered, "I'm sorry." I don't know why. It just felt like the right thing to say. The breath drew in again, longer this time, and something ticked in the grass behind me, like a fingernail testing the metal threshold of the door. Then, as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The air went flat and empty, a vacuum where a person should have been. I bolted. I sprinted for the bent fence, slid on my hip, and clawed through, ripping the rest of my shirt down the side. I got to my car, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the glass, and took off so fast my hazards didn't cancel for the first 100 yards. I don't remember the drive home, only pulling into my apartment complex and sitting there with both hands welded to the wheel. The porch light of the downstairs neighbor was on, and there were moths batting at it. It looked too normal. I needed to tell somebody so I wouldn't talk myself into believing I'd hallucinated. My phone was still at Tyler's. I went upstairs, grabbed the landline from the kitchen, a leftover from when my grandmother lived there, don't judge, and punched his number. "I forgot my phone," I said when he answered. "And I need you to tell me I'm not crazy. What did you do, dude?" His voice was filtered through sleep and the white noise of his box fan. I told him. Not the dramatic version I just wrote, but the bare bones. Woman in black, mausoleum, empty space, breathing that wasn't a breeze. He didn't laugh. "Tyler's not the type." He listened and then said, "Could have been somebody messing with you. But if she was a person who needed help." "I know," I said. I looked. There were no footprints. I know how that sounds. "Maybe she stepped in the grass and the ground was firmer there," he said, trying to be reasonable. "Or maybe she was never there." "Tyler, I mean, like, someone put a mannequin or something out there. Kids, it's almost September." "It moved," I said. "It stepped behind the building." He was quiet for a second, then said, "You want me to drive out there with you?" "No," I said too quickly. "No, I'm home. I'm fine. I just wanted to. I don't know." Hear a voice that doesn't breathe down my neck. He tried to laugh. "That's what I'm here for. I slept badly. Weird noises from the hallway woke me every hour. At 3 a.m., I dreamed I was lying on a stone slab with my ear pressed to the cold surface and something inside the slab was breathing. In the morning, I told myself it was a trick of the wind and the night and my own nerves. I told myself the storm humidity had turned each sound into a wet whisper. I told myself that even if the woman had been real, she had left or lived nearby, or had someone waiting for her on the far side of the hedge. Then Ryan, a guy I work with at the hardware store, mentioned the cemetery during lunch. "My aunt's in there," he said, picking ham off his sandwich. "The little stone building in the back. That's where they put the Brandon family. Old money. They did everything with their own plot. Built it in the 30s, I think." "Brandon," I said, remembering the carved name smothered with lichen. "That's what it said? Why?" he asked. "I drove by last night," I said, "and left it there like a ball in the middle of the table." Ryan shook his head. "People see things out there," he said, "like we were talking about weather, a phenomenon you accept and dress for. My cousin swears she saw a kid in a white shirt run between the headstones at dusk. She went after him and he'd be gone. Like no sound, no nothing. My aunt says it's squirrels." "Did your aunt ever hear?" I started, then stopped, hearing how it would sound. "Never mind." Ryan chewed and said, "What?" "Nothing. I did fine all afternoon." Then close to 9, when we were sweeping the aisles and counting cash, I found myself thinking about the mausoleum again. Not the fear part, the practical part. If there had been someone out there, someone in trouble, they might still be around. Maybe they'd left something behind. Maybe I'd find tracks in daylight that I'd missed. I told myself I'd go back, but not alone. I called Tyler as soon as we locked the door. "You're kidding," he said, "but there wasn't much heat in it. You want to go back at night?" "It won't be night by the time we get there," I lied. The sun was already bleeding into the oaks across the street. "We'll park on the shoulder. We won't even go in. I just want to see the spot from the road." "You're going in," he said. "Maybe," I said. He sighed. "Give me 10 minutes. We met at the gas station." Tyler climbed into my car with a mag light and a takeout cup of coffee he didn't need, and we drove south. The sky had gone from copper to slate by the time we reached the bend. The cemetery looked smaller than it had the night before, almost bashful. The gate was still chained. The bent fence still scooped up from the ground like a shrug. We left the car running with the hazards on. I felt better with someone else there, someone who could vouch for whatever I saw. Tyler shone the maglite through the fence, and we both squinted like the beam could cut through the trees in the dark in last night's bad dream. "There," I said, pointing. The mausoleum crouched between 2 old cedars. The fake roses lay in their patch of grass. The ribbon tangled with something I hadn't noticed before. A small, thin black cord snaked under the bouquet and disappeared behind the stone. Tyler killed the beam and said, "I'm not crawling under a fence for plastic flowers." "Just to the building," I said. "Then we leave." He rolled his eyes. 5 minutes, we crawled under. Tyler swore when the fence snagged his hoodie and laughed about tetanus, but it came out too loud, and he grimaced like even he heard how the sound didn't belong. We walked side by side, the mag light washing the headstones in harsh white. The names slid by like credits. I didn't read them. I had this irrational belief that if I looked one of them in the eye, it would look back. At the mausoleum, we stopped. The black cord wasn't a cord. It was a ribbon that had fallen from the bouquet and slipped under the door. The iron grate at the top was furred with spider web, and something had been written in the fine dust on the metal. A loop of lines half wiped away. It looked like a name traced with one finger, then erased. Till I blinked and it unraveled into nothing. "You see that?" I asked. Tyler raised the beam. "See what?" "Nothing," I said, too fast. He stepped to the side, shining the light around the back. "No one here," he announced. "No footprints either. If I were trying to spook you, I'd at least leave some cool shoe prints. What's your plan now, ghost hunter?" "Just a minute," I said. "I don't know what I expected to find. A glove, a note, a scrap of black fabric, a face in the grate. All I found was a smell like wet coins and maybe, if I'm honest, like someone's breath in the hollow of their hands." Tyler nudged the door with his knuckles and it gave a dull, reluctant ring. "Don't," I said. He smirked. "What, you think they'll open up?" Thunder rolled beyond the trees, closer than last night. The mag light picked up movement and both of us jerked. But it was only a moth shearing by the beam. Something inside the mausoleum shifted with a sound like cloth sliding over stone. Tyler froze, his face tilted like a dog hearing his name through a wall. "Hello?" he called, half a joke, half a challenge. The sound came again. A dragging, deliberate scrape, a slow repositioning, as if weight were adjusting on the other side of the door. Tyler stepped back so fast he heeled a print into the damp dirt. "Nope," he said softly. "Nope, nope, nope. We should go," I said. Then someone spoke my name. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a full word. It was the beginning of my name shaped by a tongue that wasn't sure how to make it. The first syllable pressed against the grate and released like the air from a tire. Tyler yelped, which would be funny if I hadn't done the same thing. He flashed the light into the mesh, but it only lit a rectangle of stale air, and the suggestion of a shelf against the back wall where the coffins would be. The breath pressed again against the grate. "Say that again," Tyler snapped, because bravery sometimes sounds like anger. Silence. Then a smooth exhale right up against the metal, so close that a gray film blossomed on the mesh and vanished. Tyler took 3 steps backward. The light trembled in his hand. "Okay," he said, voice rising. "We're done." We turned. We didn't run. We walked fast, breathing like we'd just sprinted, our bodies treating the move as a run whether we declared it one or not. The fence yawned at us. We slid under, skinning our elbows, and then we did run. 50 feet to my car, doors slamming, locks clicking. We sat there with the engine rumbling and the mag light in Tyler's lap, both of us listening for, I don't know, a footstep, the sound of the chain rattling on the gate, the steady pulse of breath outside the glass. None of it came. "What was that?" Tyler said finally. It wasn't a question with a question mark. It was a period with a hole in it. "I don't know." He wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Don't go back there again." "I won't. We didn't tell anyone." It felt like trying to narrate a dream where the interesting parts kept melting when you picked them up. We both went to work the next day and acted normal. That night I opened my bedroom window to get a breeze and closed it immediately, because the air coming in felt handled. I left the TV on and fell asleep to the hum of a nature documentary, which is a bad idea when the narrator keeps describing the breath patterns of nocturnal predators. 3 days later, my manager asked if I could deliver a packet of paperwork to the maintenance office for the town parks, which is a fancy way of saying they pay one guy to drive around and make sure the public restrooms aren't disasters. His name is Frank, and he is the type of person you meet twice and trust forever. I drove to the little cinder block building behind the municipal tennis courts and found him sorting a toolbox. "You get around," he said, smiling under his mustache. "You know the old cemetery?" I laughed in a way that made him look up. "Sure. They're making me be careful with it for a while," he said. "Kids have been getting in. The gate's supposed to keep them out, but you know how that goes." "What are they doing in there?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Nothing good," he said. "Taking pictures mostly. Dares, leaving little offerings. One of them said they heard somebody talking from the Brandon Mausoleum the other night. I told them it was the echo if they pressed their ear to the door. You know how it is. You talk into a box and it talks back if you want it to. Right, I said, stomach swinging. Echo. Frank squeezed a tube of sealant and looked past me, like he was remembering something he didn't entirely believe he had to do. I'm going to weld the small grate shut. It's got screws rusted clean through and someone keeps picking at them. I don't need some kid ripping it off and crawling in there. I've seen what happens when a dare ends in somebody getting stuck, and I'm not dragging anybody out of somebody else's family vault. You've heard anything strange out there? I said, making my voice light, like gossip you'd repeat and then forget. Frank paused. Strange? Talking. Breathing. I tasted the last word on my tongue and hated it. Breathing? He grinned. But it was the kind older people use when they're trying to talk you out of a story they recognize as a story. There's a whole lot of animals that make people think ghosts are trying to break their lease. Raccoon, fox. You ever hear a deer breathe when it finally decides you're not going to move? Sounds like a man on the other end of a phone call. I nodded like this was a relief. It wasn't. Maybe that would have been the end of it. If what happened next hadn't happened, I would probably have a fun fact story to tell when conversation lulls. But 3 nights later, I woke up to my name being said slowly from the hallway outside my bedroom. It was the same voice that hadn't quite managed it before, the same cautious syllable, the same careful shaping of a word that humans use every day without thinking. It came with a hush of air like a hand pressed against a keyhole. I sat up and the word died halfway out of that dark throat. I told myself it was the pipe in the wall, the one that wheezed sometimes when my upstairs neighbor showered. Tyler? I said stupidly out loud. Silence. Then a long, deliberate exhale through the crack under my door. The curtain beside my bed lifted like a person had walked past holding their breath and then let it go. I stood. I don't know why that was the choice. Fight or flight gets all the press, but there's a third option where you just become this bare nerve on legs and you move, because not moving would mean admitting your prey. I opened my door. The hallway was empty and dim with light from the kitchen night bulb. I turned it on and everything snapped into harsh yellow. The framed print of a lighthouse my grandmother loved, the laundry basket, the scuffed baseboards. Normal house. No one breathing. I walked to the front door and checked the lock even though I knew I'd bolted it from inside. The peephole stared at me like an open mouth. I thought of pressing my eye to it and then decided I didn't need that image. I turned away and almost ran into the mirror above the shoe rack. There was a thin smear on the glass at mouth level. It looked like someone had breathed on it and traced the beginning of a letter with their fingertip. It could have been anybody's. It could have been mine. I wiped it with my sleeve until the glass squeaked. I barely slept. In the morning, I called Tyler and told him only the part about the mirror and left out the voice because saying it seemed to give it a spine. He came over that night with a battery door alarm he stuck on the inside of my apartment door. One of those cheap ones that screams if you break the contact. We sat up stupid late watching dumb comedies until our eyes hurt. Nothing happened. At 2 he yawned and said, "See? Pipes." I wanted to believe him so badly I almost convinced myself it had been a dream after all. Tyler left and I fell asleep to the comfort of normal things. The hum of the fridge, the purr of the AC, footsteps on the walkway outside. Around 4, the alarm on my door chirped, the tiny sound it makes when the batteries are low. And under that mechanical bird noise, something exhaled right against the veneer, slow and careful and patient, as if it were listening to the shape of the door and learning it. The alarm didn't go off. Nothing opened. The breath went away. I lay in bed with my forearms pressed over my face like a shield. I didn't go to the cemetery again for a week. I avoided the back road. I took the long way to everything. But you can only walk around a closed door for so long. A part of me wanted to prove that I could look at the mausoleum in the daylight and have it look back at me like any other stone box full of names. On Sunday afternoon, under a hot white sky, I drove out by myself. The gate was open for a cleanup crew. I could see a pickup truck up by the caretaker's shed and a man with a rake. I felt calmer with the ordinary soundtrack of a Sunday at a public place. Metal clinking on the tailgate, a radio murmuring, a dog barking far away. I told myself, you will walk to the mausoleum, look at it, and walk back. That's all. I didn't take long. I kept to the path. The mausoleum looked smaller under the sun, almost fragile, the lichen freckles more green than black. The grate had been welded at the corners. Dull silver beads glowed around the mesh. Someone had left 3 fresh carnations where the fake roses had been. They drooped in the heat. The ribbon was gone. I reached out to touch the weld, just to prove to myself that it was real and new and human-made. The metal was warm. I pressed my ear to the grate. Not because I wanted to hear anything. Because I wanted to not hear anything, there was nothing. The stone box was as silent as an unplugged refrigerator. I backed away, relief making me dizzy. I turned, ready to wave at the guy with the rake and make a joke about heat stroke. I took 3 steps. Ty. It came from behind me, from inside the mausoleum, whispered against the newly welded mesh. A learner's tongue getting better, improving with practice. I didn't turn, I ran. I didn't stop when the rake clinked and the guy looked up. I didn't stop when he called, "Hey, you okay?" With that half laugh people use when they're not sure if you're messing with them. I didn't stop when I reached my car. I drove, and only when I hit the highway did I realize I was sobbing. Not like frightened crying, but like I had been holding my breath for a very long time and finally couldn't anymore. I told Tyler everything that night. His face lost its jokes. He rubbed his hand over his mouth like Frank and said, "Then it's not the grate. It's not the door. It's you." "Don't say that," I said, which I know is a dumb thing to say to a true statement. He backpedaled immediately. "I didn't mean it like that. I mean, maybe you're hearing your own name where there's just wind. There's a word for that, audio. Pareido something. Pareidolia," I said. "That's faces. But yeah, maybe." We sat there in my living room with the alarm on my door and the mirror wiped clean and every light on. At some point, we both fell asleep on the couch with a baseball game whispering from the TV. The breath woke me. Not in the hall. Not at the door. Right behind the couch where the wall is. Steady now, calm. Not practicing anymore. This time it didn't say my name. I don't think it needed to. It breathed for a long time, and when I moved my hand to shake Tyler awake, the breath fell quiet like it wanted to hear what I would do. I didn't shake him. I lay there and listened to the old building not move and the new thing learn how to be quiet. I haven't seen the woman in black again. I don't think I will. I think I saw her because I needed to be the kind of person who stops for someone standing in the dark. I think I followed her because somewhere under the fear, there's a small piece of me that believes if I don't go toward the thing that scares me, it will come find me anyway. Maybe that's all this is. The shape of fear coming around the back of something old and empty to stand where I will feel it. 2 nights. I go, this is the part I don't know how to write like a reasonable person. The maintenance guy, Frank, called the store looking for rope and a new lock. Ryan took the call and rolled his eyes and said into the phone, "Sure thing, Frank, I got you." After he hung up, he told us Frank was spooked. "He says someone keeps leaving the gate unchained," Ryan said. "He swears he locks it at dusk and it's open at dawn. Doesn't see any cuts. Just open." I bought a second door alarm. I put it on my bedroom window. I leave the TV on too loud. I sleep with the remote on my chest the way kids sleep with stuffed animals. I haven't been back to the cemetery. But the cemetery has been back to me in the only way it can, which is to teach the breath that used to fog the mesh how to sit in my hallway and be patient. Sometimes it comes when I'm washing dishes. Sometimes it comes when I'm in the shower and the steam makes the room close in private, and it thinks I won't hear it over the water. Sometimes it wakes me with the soft pressure of air at the inside curve of my ear, like someone whispering a secret but forgetting the words. Last night I dreamed about the mausoleum again. In the dream, the metal door was gone and there was only a curtain of black ribbon hanging from the lintel. 100 thin strips like the tape you put in doorways to keep flies out. I pushed through and inside there was nothing but a single stone shelf and the impression of something that had just stepped away, leaving the shape of its warmth behind. When I turned to leave, the ribbons dragged across my shoulders and I realized I was hearing a car pass on the road. And then the sound wasn't a car at all, but breathing through 100 narrow gaps. And then I wasn't dreaming, or maybe I was, and the breath was exactly where it always is, right behind me, waiting like it always waited, patient as a stone in a world of weather. I have moved a chair against my front door, because in every story there's a person who thinks a chair against a door can hold back what is not a person. I know how silly that sounds. It isn't for the thing. It's for me. It is the physical human action that says I have done a thing. I have put weight against the threshold. I am here and I am awake and I know you are too. I won't go back to the cemetery. I will pass it on the highway and not look down the shoulder. If I have to take the back road, I will watch the double yellow like it's the only line that can keep me on this side of the night. If I see someone standing in front of a mausoleum, I will not stop. I will not follow. I will not crawl under a fence. I will admit that whatever needed me then has learned its way to my door. And if I hear breathing when I finish typing this, if it draws in behind me and I feel the cool cloud of it slide over the back of my neck, testing the edge of me like a tongue tests the edge of a tooth, I will not turn around. I will say softly, into the stillness of my living room, into the hollow where a face would be if this were a normal kind of danger, that I am sorry. I will mean it. I will wait, because I have learned that listening is a kind of gate, and I am sick with the feeling that I opened it when I stepped behind a stone building to help a woman who was there until the moment she wasn't. Something breathed behind me just now. Long and careful and close. I'm not going to check. I know what I will see, or not see. That's not the point. The point is the sound. The patient exhale that means I am not alone, and that I am in every way that matters. The point is that sometimes the figure behind the mausoleum isn't trying to get out. Sometimes it's learning the shape of how to follow you home.